Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ali. I'm an entrepreneur and author, but in a previous life, a few years ago, I spent 6 years in medical school at Cambridge University and 2 years working full-time as a doctor in the UK's National Health Service. And there was one app that got me through that entire experience, and that app is called Anki. It's essentially a flashcard app, and if you're a student of any sort and you have to memorize stuff, you need to be using Anki because it is just absolutely incredible. It's free, it's open source, and it just completely changed my life when I discovered it in medical school. Now, Anki and flashcard software in general is based on two key concepts around effective studying and learning, which are called active recall and spaced repetition. These are things I've been making videos about since like 2017, so you might have seen some of those videos. I'll link some of them down below. And it's not just me who thinks that Anki is an absolute game changer. There are literally hundreds of thousands of students all around the world who swear by using Anki for pretty much every subject, from medicine to law, computer science, and even art subjects like English and history and geography and stuff. The issue with an app like Anki is that it's very powerful, but it also has a little bit of a learning curve. And that is why a few years ago, I decided to create an entire online course on how to use Anki. And previously, this course was available for paying subscribers on Skillshare, but recently me and my team decided, you know what, let's just put it for free on YouTube because why not? Now, I'll warn you now, this class is absolutely massive. There are going to be loads of timestamps down in the video description. And if you're just getting started with Anki, you only really need the first bit of the class. But for the sake of completeness, I've put in a bunch of bonus content where I interviewed some of my friends and people who are really good at using Anki, and they shared their tips. And yeah, the class is a few years old, and so I look a little bit younger, but Anki, the app, hasn't really changed substantially in that time. So I hope you enjoy this completely free masterclass in how to use Anki, an absolutely game-changing app that will transform the way you approach learning and studying anything. Hello, welcome to the class. In this video, I'm going to explain the class structure. So in the first segment, we're going to be introducing kind of the basics of Anki, like why you should use Anki and the power of flashcards. If you are, familiar with the idea of spaced repetition and active recall and stuff, feel free to skip these videos. And actually, I think that's a general theme for this whole class. You don't really have to watch all the videos in the order that they're given. You can just kind of pick and choose the stuff that you want, because I know people are going to be coming into this with different levels of experience with flashcards and with Anki and just with studying in general. So the first chapter of the class is kind of aimed at complete beginners. It's about things like how to install Anki and how to synchronize it with Anki Web. But then we've also got some stuff about basic flashcards, closed deletions, and image occlusions, and reverse flashcard types, which even if you have been using Anki before in the past, if you're not a complete professional at using Anki, you still might find those basic videos helpful, because I think it's really important to get a solid foundational understanding of how Anki works before we kind of dive into the nitty-gritty of it. So that was chapter 1. Chapter 2 of the class is going to be walkthrough based. So assuming you've got this foundational knowledge of how Anki works with all these different card types, I'll be taking you through how me and a few other people, how we would create flashcards from lectures, from classes in real life, and from textbooks, and how kind of the process works for making an effective flashcard. At that point, you should have all the information you need to just kind of get started with Anki, and then the rest of the class is fairly optional. But in part 3, chapter 3, we're going to be answering some frequently asked questions. So in preparation for this class, I posted on my Instagram asking people to send in their questions, and we've tried our best to answer every single common question that people had. The most common ones were around things like motivation and consistency and discipline, like how to actually bring yourself to do your flashcards every day. So hopefully we've got some advice for that. But there were also a lot of questions about specifics about flashcards, like how long should your Anki flashcard be, how much information should you have on it, and how to avoid things like flashcard overload. And a load of people were, for some reason, interested in how Anki fits into a wider study strategy. And so we've got videos comparing Anki and Notion, Anki and Quizlet, Anki and Google Sheets. And I'll be sharing my philosophy of how I use Anki to study for all sorts of things along the way. Then in chapter 4, we've got the optimizations, the advanced stuff, where we're going to be talking about tags, a handful of add-ons that we recommend you install, and the immense power of pre-made decks, but also the potential pitfalls with pre-made decks, because pre-made decks genuinely have the potential to change the game completely when it comes to your flashcards, but you got to kind of use them properly. Otherwise, it becomes very overwhelming, and we just want to throw our laptops in the bin because pre-made decks can just be a nightmare to deal with. Hopefully, you'll find a way to navigate pre-made decks in chapter 4. So that was it. Thank you for watching this introductory video, and I will see you in chapter 1, where I'll have a change of clothes for the very first segment of the class. All right, so what is a flashcard? A flashcard is very simply, well, it's a card that you have something on the front and you have something on the back. So for example, with this, capital of France, that would be the front of my flashcard, and on the back of my flashcard is the word Paris. So capital of France and Paris, this is a flashcard. And the idea is that I would have a deck of flashcards so that when I come to it, I look at the front, I see capital of France, and then I think, okay, cool. I think that's Paris. And then I turn over and I'm like, yes, I got it right. Or if I saw capital of France, I think, oh, I think it might be London. and turn over. Oh yes, it's Paris, of course. This is basically what a flashcard is. This looks really simple, but flashcards are absolutely magical inventions that have the power to change your life. Like genuinely, I'm not overstating this enough. Flashcards, and in using flashcards properly, is 100% a total game changer when it comes to effective studying. So why are flashcards good? So flashcards are good because it encourages us to use active recall. And if you've seen my previous class about how to study for exams, and if you haven't, then you should, please. I talk a lot about active recall and how it's the single most powerful effective study technique. Basically, the idea is that we test ourselves, and the process of testing ourselves strengthens the connections in our brain between the kind of stuff that we have to learn. Therefore, if I were to just read in a book, the capital of France is Paris, the capital of France is Paris, the capital of France is Paris, or just write it down or highlight it or whatever, it wouldn't stick in my brain as much as if I actually tested myself. If I actually thought, oh, what the hell is the capital of France? And turned over, oh yes, it's Paris. You know, the act of testing ourselves is what strengthens those connections. And flashcards are a very easy way to force ourselves to use active recall because we have to test ourselves. Now, why else are flashcards good? Well, flashcards also lend themselves very well to the second most effective study technique, and that's called spaced repetition. Now, spaced repetition, again, I talk about this in depth in my YouTube videos and in my other class, which you should definitely check out. Spaced repetition's objective is to combat the forgetting curve. Now, there's this thing in the scientific literature. In fact, I'm going to show you a fantastic article from Nick Case called How to Remember Anything Forever. It takes about 20 minutes to go through, but there's a graph that I want to show you here. Here we go. In 1885, Hermann Ebbinghaus performed an act of scientific masochism. He memorized thousands of nonsense words, recorded how much he forgot over time, and discovered the forgetting curve. He found that you forget most of what you learn in the first 24 hours, and then if you don't practice recall, active recall flashcards, your remaining memories decay exponentially. We've all had this thing where we study something one day and then the next day it feels like it's completely gone, or a week later we don't even remember studying it in the first place. This is not because we are stupid, it's because this is how our brain works. It's called the forgetting curve. Over time we exponentially forget things. And this is sort of what it looks like. So there's this interactive graph over here, and we can see that it's essentially an exponential decay over time, so our memories will decay. The idea behind spaced repetition. Let's start with the repetition bit. Like once we recall the stuff, so for example, if I learned that the capital of France was Paris, then I would be forgetting it according to this forgetting curve. But let's say some point later, I retested myself on the fact that the capital of France is Paris. At that point, my memory would go back to up to 100%, and then it would restart the forgetting curve. So you can see here, let's say I start my recall at this point, you know, it goes up to 100% strength of memory, and then it again decays exponentially. The slightly interesting thing about this is that every time that we revise the thing, every time we recall that the capital of France is Paris, the decay happens less steeply. So for example, if we move this interactive graph, you'll notice that the lines are getting less and less steep. Right at the start, if we look at the very first one, that is a very kind of steep drop off. This is exactly how memory works. It's a steep exponential curve. But if we recall it there, and over there, and over there, and over there, we see that actually it takes us longer to forget the same amount of information, which is why you never forget that the capital of France is Paris, because you've just come across that fact so often that it's now memorized forever. And that's the idea behind spaced repetition. Here's a nice little graph. And if we hit the auto optimize button, if we want to kind of optimize our memory to stay in this kind of yellow sweet spot, you'll see that the intervals that we are repeating it at gradually lengthen. And the idea is that because as we repeat the topics and as we repeat that factual recall, we strengthen the connections, and then it takes us longer to forget it. But it's the fact that we've forgotten it and then we're recalling it, that is what allows the memory to take hold. Because the brain, as I say in my previous class, is sort of like a muscle in that when it's working hard, it's growing. But if it's working too easily, it's not growing. So I could read capital of France is Paris over and over again in a single study session, but my brain wouldn't be working because I haven't forgotten that fact. Whereas over time, as I allow my brain to forget some of the stuff and then I recall it, that's like the magical way to remember anything forever. So this is all basically to introduce the concept of flashcards. Flashcards are amazing because of active recall. And with physical flashcards, you can create a spaced repetition system around them. So back in the day, what people used to do is they would have a box for stuff that I don't know, They would have a box for stuff that I know kind of well. They would have a box for stuff I know a bit more better. They would have another box for stuff I know a bit better than that. And you know, you would have your flashcards in like different piles. And the idea would be that, let's say you've got the capital of France is Paris and you knew it very well, you'd move it up to the next pile and you'd review the second pile maybe every 3 days. Then let's say you know it really well, you would move it up to the next pile and you'd review this pile maybe every 7 days, and so on until the final pile you were only looking at once every 3 months. And that was the way that people used to use spaced repetition with flashcards back in the day. But the whole reason behind this class is that there is an easier way, and that easier way is Anki, and Anki is the single best flashcard app on the planet, which reasons why we're going to go into in depth. And in this whole class, I'm basically going to be giving you a very beginner's introduction to how to use Anki to memorize, to learn absolutely anything. I started using Anki in my first year of med school, and I discovered it a little bit too late. I discovered it towards the end of the year, and I was thinking, damn, I really wish I'd discovered this sooner. I used Anki properly in my second and third year of med school, and I got a first class degree. In fact, in my third year of med school, I even ranked top of the year because I used Anki so much. And then I kind of didn't really use it in my fourth year, I did average. And then in my fifth year of med school, I used Anki extensively and I did very well in the exams. And then in final year, I was making YouTube videos, so I didn't really care. But so like even anecdotally for me, the years in which I've used Anki have been easily my highest performing years exam-wise. And I've also been a lot less stressed through exam revision just because I've had the system of Anki. So that's enough of a sales pitch for Anki. Let's now talk about what Anki is and exactly why you should use it. Okay, so we've talked about the theory of flashcards. Let's now talk about Anki, which is basically what this entire class is going to be about. Now, Anki, look, powerful, intelligent flashcards, remembering things just became easier, much easier, in fact. And this is at apps.ankiweb.net, so you can just Google the word Anki, and it will be the first result. apps.ankiweb.net. Remember anything, remember anywhere, remember efficiently. This is Anki. It's basically flashcard software, which incorporates active recall and spaced repetition, and has a load of other features, some of which, the beginner features, we're going to break down in this class. And then in the next class, it's going to be kind of intermediate to advanced like at Anki. We'll be deep diving into all the weird and wonderful ways that you can customize Anki. Anki is also free. It is completely free. You do have to pay a little bit of money for the iOS app if you want. I think it's 100% worth it. But if for some reason you have an aversion to paying for software, you can just use Anki on the web. You can use the Windows app. You can use the Mac app. You can use the Android app for free. And I think there are some third-party iOS apps as well. Basically, it's free. Every student in the world can benefit from using Anki or using flashcards of some sort. And I'm going to argue that Anki is the single best one. So Anki is a program which makes remembering things easily. It's a lot more efficient than traditional study methods, and you can either greatly decrease your time spent studying or greatly increase the amount that you learn. You can use it to learn a language, study for medical and law exams, memorize people's names and faces, a bit pointless, brushing up on geography, mastering long poems, even practicing guitar chords. And I've used Anki for various kind of aspects of that. They've got synchronization, i.e. Anki Web is a sort of free online service that keeps your decks synchronized across different devices. So I can do my flashcards on my phone or on my iPad or on any computer that I go to because I can do it online. So yeah, Anki is flashcard software that incorporates spaced repetition. Now, how does this work? Basically, when you see a flashcard in Anki, you active recall, you test yourself on what it is, and then you see the answer, and then you can rate whether you found it easy, medium, or hard. Basically. And based on whether you click easy, medium, or hard, Anki has this special spaced repetition algorithm that's modeled after a service called SuperMemo from back in the day. The details of that don't really matter. But basically, it automatically figures out what the spaced repetition intervals should be for stuff that you marked easy, medium, or hard. So if I found something easy, it would then ask me again in 3 days' time. If I found it hard, it would ask me in 15 minutes time. And over time, as I'm going through my flashcards repeatedly, I'm rating myself in terms of how hard I found the stuff. And then Anki is resurfacing the relevant things appropriately based on when I'm most likely to just pass that threshold of forgetting. And so if we can do Anki every day, we can basically trust the algorithm. And really, like the way that I thought of Anki in med school and the way that everyone I know who uses Anki properly thinks of it, it's that Anki sort of functions as a second brain. And you know that if you make a flashcard in Anki, provided you are consistently looking at flashcards every day, you know that that fact or that concept is just going to get uploaded to your brain. And in a way, it takes all of the stress out of studying because we all really struggle to remember stuff and like to figure out each day, like, what am I going to study? What I'm going to do? Like, I don't know what my weakest topic is. All of this stuff. If we just chucked everything into Anki and did our flashcards consistently over time, it would just get uploaded to our brain. That is the way to think about it. A few caveats with that, that I'll talk about later in the optimization section. We shouldn't be chucking everything into Anki. Anki is very good for specific factoids, specific examinable facts. It's not great for like understanding concepts. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That's a little bit more advanced, but basically Anki is amazing. You should definitely download Anki. So that was kind of an introduction to what Anki actually is. All right, so in this video, we're going to be talking about why Anki rather than some other alternatives. Now, if you're already sold on Anki, please feel free to skip this video and just move on to the next ones in the series. But basically, Anki is, well, the best flashcard software on the planet. A big reason why that is because Anki is free and Anki is open source, which means other people can contribute to it. And that means there are like hundreds of people around the world who have added their own add-ons and their own customizations to Anki and who have really drilled down into the spaced repetition algorithm and figured out what the best kind of intervals are, that sort of thing. The other stuff you could use something like Quizlet. I've experimented with Quizlet for a bit. It's quite nice. It's quite pretty. But the one annoying thing about Anki, it's not very pretty and it can sometimes feel like it's not intuitive. There is a bit of a learning curve. With Quizlet, there is no learning curve, but Quizlet is also a lot less powerful than Anki overall. You really can't customize it. It takes a lot of effort to make cards. You can't make cards offline in a sort of reasonable fashion. The synchronization is a bit weird with different devices. And while Quizlet is very pretty, it's like Anki with a layer of paint. It also means you can't customize it. And so if you're serious about using flashcards, and you know how to operate a computer proficiently, then you will have no problem with Anki. There is a slight learning curve, but that is what this class is about. It's to get you started with Anki. If, for example, your grandma who doesn't know how to use a computer wants to memorize all the capitals of the world, then fine, use Quizlet. Anki is not for your grandma, but you are not your grandma. You're watching a class wherever you're watching this, and you know how to use a computer. Therefore, you want to do this properly, you want to use Anki rather than Quizlet. A few questions that people have asked over the years is, what about Google Sheets or what about Notion? Now, I've made a video called about how I used Google Sheets as a sort of flashcard alternative and why I didn't like Anki. I would recommend overall, use Anki when you can, because Anki is designed for spaced repetition and active recall. My Google Sheets method, that is designed for cramming. It's designed for when the exam is only a few weeks away and I'm thinking, oh crap, I really need to focus on the stuff that I'm weakest on. I don't really have the time to do the flashcard thing properly where I make flashcards and review them every day and blah, blah. I probably still could have done it with Anki if I twiddled the settings a bit, but at the time I didn't really know much about how to twiddle the settings of Anki properly. And so I went with the Google Sheets method, which is still pretty good if you're cramming for an exam. But if you're studying for the long term, if your exam is more than a few weeks away, you'll benefit from Anki rather than Google Sheets. And then it comes to Notion. So let's see, I'll show you some of my notes on Notions. So what I do is I do use Notion for things like scoping the subject, where within gastrointestinal physiology, I have created these kind of toggles for myself that have questions. What is functional hyperemia in this context? Cool, blood supply to the villi. This is sort of flashcards. It's sort of active recall in that I am testing myself, but this is not designed for spaced repetition. The main reason why I use Notion is because I basically want to apply active recall to absolutely everything that I'm doing. And for me right now, I don't need to memorize a lot of this information because when it comes to human physiology, I'm teaching the subject, and when I'm teaching it, I can have the notes open in front of me. So it's not that I need information uploaded to my brain to prepare for an exam. And the information that I need uploaded to my brain for my life as a doctor is already in my brain. Like, I don't need to understand the basics of first-year medical school gut physiology to understand how to be a doctor effectively, which is why I kind of use Notion for this sort of stuff. It's very good at giving you a big picture understanding of the whole subject, which is something that Anki is not. And actually what I usually recommend is you combine Anki and Notion. But for those of you asking, should I use Notion as a flashcard alternative? No, you shouldn't. If you can, you should use Anki, because Anki is incredible, like absolutely game-changing for memorizing facts. Notion with the toggle feature, or Google Sheets or any other sort of thing, is good for getting a big picture understanding. And that is important. But for a subject like medicine, there is only so much big picture understanding you can do before you run into the wall of just having to memorize a load of stuff. And Anki is the absolute single best thing you can use to memorize a load of stuff, bar none. So that is why you should use Anki. Paper flashcards, complete waste of time. Why would you go through the effort of having to create stacks of paper flashcards unless you're one of those people that feels productive by writing with colorful pens and stuff? I mean, if it works for you, then fine, but the reason you're watching this class is because you want to learn how to memorize anything with Anki. It's the 21st century. We don't need to be using paper flashcards. If we're using these are suboptimal. We should be using Anki. Anki is the one. Let's move on to the next section where we talk about the mechanics of Anki, the very basics, how to install it, how to get set up, and a load of stuff about the basic fundamental types of flashcards that you can create. All right, so that was why Anki is the best software. Why do I use Anki personally? Well, I use Anki to memorize specific factoids for medicine, and I also used Anki extensively in my third year of med school when I was studying psychology as an extra degree to memorize chunks and chunks of paragraphs for my essays and to memorize paper references and stuff like that. So I have extensively used Anki in both a science subject fashion, i.e. memorizing individual fact, but also in a kind of arts subject like psychology, where it's instead of memorizing an individual fact that, you know, this is what insulin does, it's more about, okay, what is the theory of short-term memory versus long-term memory, and what did Baddeley and Hitch's experiments in 1972 display about short-term memory versus long-term memory. You know, stuff like that involves memorizing large chunks of information. So I've used Anki for both those use cases, and I found it really good. I've also started recently to use Anki to help me learn music theory. So I found some pre-made decks, more on that later, that bring up kind of different notes of the musical stave or clef or whatever it's called. And I'm trying to learn sight reading through that, because I know if I do them consistently that anything in Anki will be uploaded to my brain, and I think that would be helpful. So that's why I personally use Anki. If you're convinced at this point, then please move on to the next video. But if you're not, here are some interviews that I've done with other people over the last few weeks who use Anki a lot, and these are what they think about Anki and why it's amazing. Can you just tell me how you discovered Anki and sort of how it's affected your life kind of broadly?
Yeah, so I discovered Anki through your YouTube videos on evidence-based revision, and I started using it for my BMAT revision, and then I carried on for my A-levels. And I think it allows me to spend a lot less time studying, but I feel like I'm studying more effectively and I'm getting better results, even though I'm spending less time studying. So it's a lot less stressful because I'm not having to cram before exams. I'm studying all the time, like 20 minutes every day. So it adds up to a lot of studying, but it's less stressful and it's more spread out.
That's one of the things about Anki, that if you can bring yourself to do it consistently, overall, you actually probably spend less time working, and you definitely have reduced stress levels.
Yeah, 100%. And I totally agree with you. You save a lot of time, right? Like, you're someone who's like the productivity king, and I'm someone who also appreciates, time allocation. And I can say with Anki, I was able to go through medical school. I was exercising every day. I was getting the amount of sleep I wanted to get. I was calling my parents every day. I felt so much less stressed, and I still got, just as good of outcomes. And, I'm still able to, feel competent in the hospital.
Yeah.
And that's astounding to me, because that didn't happen to me in undergrad. I was sleeping 4 hours a night and just trying to make ends meet. And now I have this tool and I feel amazing. I have a life.
Okay, so that was why you should use Anki instead of other apps, why I use Anki personally, and why these other people use Anki. And I've done like 8 interviews with people who use Anki over the last couple of weeks, and everyone talks about how Anki literally changed their life. So if that's not enough of a sell, then I don't know what is. But hopefully I've convinced you at this point. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, where we'll start a new section where we go over the mechanics of Anki and exactly how it works and how you operate it and how to make the flashcards and how to make them amazing. All right, welcome to this next section of the course, which is all about the basic mechanics of Anki. And in this video, we're talking about how to install Anki. If you know how to use a computer, you probably know how to install stuff, but just for completeness, we're including this video. If you have no problems with installing software, then please, by all means, skip this video and move on to the next one. But yeah, basically, we want to go on apps.ankiweb.net, or we just type in Anki on Google. Find the first result, Anki Powerful Intelligent Flashcards, and we hit the download button. Now, you've got it for Windows, Mac, Linux. If you're using Linux, you really don't need me to give you a tutorial on how to install stuff. iPhone and Android, and some development stuff, let's ignore that. So I'm on a Mac right now, and I'm gonna install Anki for Mac OS 10 whatever standard version. If you're on Windows, you just install the 64-bit or 32-bit Windows version, depending on which version of Windows you're on. And it just basically gives you a guide here. So I'm gonna hit download Anki, and it's gonna download. Cool, now it's downloaded. I'm gonna click on that downloaded file. It's gonna verify, and then save the file to your desktop, open it, and drag Anki to your applications folder or desktop. There we go, and now it's come up with this sort of thing, which is how you install stuff on a Mac. You click, you drag, it goes into applications, and you're done. Oh, here we go. It is copying across 350 megabytes, so it might take a little bit of time to download if your internet is slow. Okay. Anki is now officially installed. So to open it up, I'm gonna open up the Mac thingy majiggy bar. I wouldn't do this in real life. And I would type in Anki, and I click on it, and it will open up. And this is Anki. This is not what you'll see. You'll see a more blank screen, but I've got a few decks in here, which I'll go over in a while. But let's pretend we see a completely blank screen. We have now officially installed Anki. And if you want to install it on iPhone, Android, you just chuck it over here. Yeah, basically that's how you install Anki. Okay, so in this video, we are talking about the anatomy of Anki and what all the different buttons and stuff actually do. So when you open up Anki, you will see this page, and it'll probably be blank because it probably won't have any decks in it other than a default deck. This is basically the home screen. Now, this screen is your decks screen. It shows you all of your different decks of flashcards. So you can see over here, I've got one that's music based that has some stuff inside it. I've got one for MRCP, which is the membership of the Royal College of Physicians, which is an exam. I've got my third year psychology deck. I've got a past medicine snippets deck. I've got a USMLE preparation deck, which is a exam you take to get into residency in medicine in the United States. Studied 0 cards today in 0 seconds per card. This is the sort of default screen that you will get. In order to create a deck, and I'd recommend you create a first deck, you hit the create deck button and it asks you for the name of a deck. So let's say capital cities, and I'm gonna hit okay. And now we will see capital cities as formed as a deck. But if I click on it, it says, congratulations, you finished the deck for now, because it doesn't have any flashcards inside it. So this is the deck screen, and I can create all the decks that I want. Music, notation, fine. I can create a deck for Nobel Prize winners. If that's what I wanted to memorize, I can create a deck for, I don't know, French vocabulary. Like, you can create decks for whatever you want. In general, you should probably have fewer decks rather than too many, but obviously capital cities and French vocabulary are totally different subject. Whereas, you know, for all of medicine, it sort of makes sense to have them within one deck. We'll talk more about that later. Anyway, this is the decks screen. Now, let's say you want to add a flashcard. That's the next thing along. Shortcut key A, and it's really helpful to get familiar with the shortcuts. But for now, we're going to click on everything just so it's really obvious what's going on. So I'm going to hit the add button, and this sort of window will open up. And this is the add field where you can add a flashcard. So you'll see the front and the back. So for example, front, we can say capital of France. And in the back, we can say Paris. And that is my flashcard. Now there's a few other bits in this screen that can look a bit complicated. The type, it makes sense to start with basic. Like basic is the main type that we're going to go over, but there are a few other types that I'll talk about a little bit later. Deck lets you select which deck you want this to go in. You'll see like a long list of stuff because, for example, a lot of these decks are subdivided into other stuff. But we're going to keep things simple. We're going to chuck it into our capital cities deck, which is what it was by default. Capital France, back Paris. The fields button, this is sort of complicated. Basically, we don't need to worry about it. It just lets you generate new fields if you want, but you can ignore that. The cards button, again, lets you change the styling and the text. So if I wanted to make this bigger, I could say 24 or I could say 36 and it would get bigger, but let's just keep it as a default. This is complicated stuff. We don't need to worry about fields and cards. Now this is just sort of basic things. So I could say capital of France, I could bold it, or I could use Command B to bold, italic, underline, square, probably not. Yeah, you can just sort of customize it. There is an image button and there's a close deletion button that we're gonna go over in a while. But let's keep things basic for now. Capital of France, Paris, and then tags. Tags we can safely ignore for the time being. We'll talk about tags in a video further down the line. But essentially, let's say, in fact, let's do Europe. So I can say that Europe is a tag. The benefit of tags is that it then lets you search through your decks and find all the capitals that are in Europe. Or alternatively, if you were for some reason studying for a European capitals quiz, you could create a custom study session where you're just looking at that appropriate tag. But again, tags are complicated. Tags are an advanced feature. As a beginner to Anki, we don't need to worry about tags. It just gets confusing. But I'm not even gonna tag with Europe just because there's no point. And you'll see capital of France, Paris. That's basically all we need. Now we hit the add button. It looks like nothing happens, but it says waiting for editing to finish, resume now. Everything disappears, which means that our card has been officially created. Now, if I close this add screen, you'll see that in the capital cities, there is one new card. And this is another important thing about the anatomy of Anki to understand, that we have cards that are new that we haven't yet studied, and we have cards that are due, cards that we've studied before that we are due to study again today. So if I click on the capital cities deck, and we'll see there's one new, learning is orange and to review is green. Forget about the learning category, it doesn't really matter. I hit study now, it says capital of France. Now this is what it looks like when you're studying something, and I think about it, I know the capital of France is Paris, so I can click the show answer button, or I can just press the space bar, and I would really recommend you press the space bar for it, and it shows Paris. Now it's asking, do I want to see it again in 3 minutes? Do I want it to be marked as good, which is 15 minutes, or do I want to mark it as easy, which is it comes back up in 4 days? And this is where the spaced repetition intervals come in. So let's say I knew that the capital of France was Paris. I'm going to say good. And it's going to come up again because it's the only card in my deck. I'm going to say good, and it's going to come up in a day's time. And then it's going to say, congratulations, you have finished this deck, which is easy because we only had one card. So that's like the very, very basics. So that was what the add screen looks like. Let's look at the browse screen now. Now this can look complicated. This is what my browse screen looks like, but there's a lot more stuff here than you're going to see in your browse screen. Basically on the browse screen, you can look at your entire collection of flashcards, or you can look at specific flashcards in specific decks. So over here, I've clicked on capital cities and you'll see I've got capital of France over here. If I look at my third year psychology, you can see over here, I've got Zellner et al. 2006, and it shows you what is on the front and on the back of these flashcards. So I can say Watkinson et al. And this is what my flashcards look like. These are the ones that I was studying from in my third year of psychology. This is just a selection of them. I couldn't find the deck that had all of them in it because there were loads more. But the browse screen basically lets you browse your decks. It can look intimidating, but it's not really. Stats lets you see how many flashcards you studied. So there's no data on here because I've reinstalled this, but we can basically ignore the stats feature. It's just there. And then the sync button, we hit it and it synchronizes with Anki Web. Now, the first time you press the sync button, it's going to ask you for a username and password. So you're going to need to go on Anki Web and create a username and password because that's what your decks are going to be synchronized with, but we'll go over that in a while. And that is basically the anatomy of Anki. That is what everything does. There are these buttons here, get shared and import file. Get shared opens up Anki Web and lets you download someone else's deck, which we'll go over in a different video. And import file lets you import a file like an Anki deck package. I think it's a KPKG file extension. Those are useful if you're sharing decks with your friends or if you're downloading decks off the internet. But apart from that, we now know everything about Anki. We've got these menus over here, but really we don't need to worry about that for now. We'll talk more about those a little bit later. Now, hopefully this has given you a very brief overview, and bear in mind, my Anki looks a lot more complicated than yours will for now. And just you wait until you see the expert edition of the course, where we've got like people who've been using Anki every day for 700 days and how massive their Ankis look. Let's start by keeping it simple for the time being, because Anki does have a bit of a learning curve, and the easier we can make the starting process of it, the better we'll be doing in the long run. So in the last video, I showed you what the anatomy of Anki looks like and like what the Anki user interface does and what the different elements do. And we created actually our first basic flashcard, which was, what is the capital of France? It is Paris. And in this video, we're just going to create a few more basic flashcards because this is the bread and butter of Anki. And if we can get quick at doing these, things will improve. And I'll be sharing some keyboard shortcuts as we go along, because I'm going to assume you're intelligent here and you're not, and you want to optimize, and clicking with the mouse is not very optimum. In general, when using a computer, we want to be using keyboard shortcuts. So as I go along, I'll be explaining what keyboard shortcuts I'm using to create stuff, and we'll be able to kind of make this whole process of creating stuff more efficient. So let's go to our capital cities deck. Currently, there's nothing in it because we've only got one flashcard that we've finished. And let's add a flashcard. And I'm going to use the shortcut A to add. And to figure out what these shortcuts are, you just hover over the button. I'm hovering over the add button and I can see shortcut key A. Okay, so from now on, I'm going to press A to create flashcards. So I'm going to create my flashcards now. So one way of doing that would be, so Afghanistan, and the capital is Kabul. Because this is my capital cities deck, I don't need to waste time by typing capital of Afghanistan question mark. I can just literally go Afghanistan. The back of it is Kabul, and I'm not going to bother tagging because it's a bit complicated. In fact, should we tag? Nah, let's not tag. It's a bit complicated. Okay, Afghanistan, Kabul, and then I could hit the add button, but you'll see shortcut is command and enter, or control and enter if you're on Windows. And so I'm going to hit command, enter, and you'll see that little thing came up. It said added. That flashcard has now been added. Let's add a few more. So Albania, the capital is Tirana. Cool. Algeria, Algiers, Andorra, La Vella. Command enter. Angola, Luanda, Antigua and Barbuda, St. John's. So you can see that I'm just using tab to switch between the front and back, or shift and tab to go back. You could click, but you're not a clicker. You're a keyboard warrior, not a clicker. Clicking is bad. We want to get out of the clicking mindset. Anytime we're clicking, we know we're being inefficient. Antigua and Barbuda, St. John's, add, and let's just do one more. So Argentina, Buenos Aires, command enter. We have added a bunch of flashcards. We'll now see that there are 7 new cards, and if we hit study now, we'll see Afghanistan. I know the capital of Afghanistan is Kabul, so I'm going to hit space. Kabul, yeah, that's pretty easy. I knew that anyway. Capital of Albania, I actually have no idea what the capital of Albania is. Tirana, oh damn, okay. So I'm going to hit again. I'm going to hit the number 1. Because if we look here, if we hover over again, shortcut key 1, shortcut key 2, and shortcut key 3. So by hitting 1, I know that that is going to come up again in the next 3 minutes. Cool. Algeria is Algiers, and I knew that already, so I'm going to hit easy. Andorra is, no idea. Andorra La Vella. I should have known that. This is active recall in action, but so that's going to come up again. And I usually hit again if I have even a slight hesitation when going for the flashcard. And I usually hit good otherwise. I actually don't normally hit easy. I think in general, when you're actually learning stuff, you should avoid hitting the easy card. unless you just know without a shadow of a doubt that you're never going to forget that. And I know I'm never going to forget that the capital of Afghanistan is Kabul because I've known that for years, but I'm not really going to hit easy while doing medical stuff. Plus it also feels a bit like hubris, but like, oh, that was easy, and then you forget it and then you think, damn, I'm an idiot. So basically I only ever use 1 and 2. I only ever use again or good, and I would suggest you do the same just to simplify things. So that can come up again, and I'm just going to show you by clicking, but in real life I press 1. Angola, no idea, Luanda, okay, again. Antigua and Barbuda, St. John's. Cool, that was good. Argentina, Buenos Aires, easy because I knew that anyway. Albania, was it Tirana? Tirana, yes. I can say that's good now. Andorra, Andorra la Vella. Yep, that's good. Angola. What's the capital of Angola? Tirana? Oh, Luanda. Damn, what was it? Albania, that was Tirana. So this one definitely comes up again. Antigua and Barbuda, St. John's, nice and easy. I'm going to put good for that, and you'll see it's going to come up in 1 day's time. So it's going to disappear from my current crop of reviewing. Angola, the capital of Angola is... Oh, I'm getting confused with Angola and what was it, Armenia? Luanda. Yes, got it. But that was too much hesitation, so that's going to come... I want that to come up again, so I'm going to hit 1. Albania is Tirana. Okay, again, too much hesitation. I want that to come up again. Angola, Luanda, good. And Albania, Tirana, good. Andorra, Luanda. Oh no, I'm getting confused with all these A's. Andorra la Vella, obviously. Angola is Luanda, fine. Andorra is Andorra la Vella, fine. Albania is Tirana, fine. Andorra is Andorra la Vella, fine. And now going through these 7 flashcards, you'll see how often they were coming up, right? Because the ones that I didn't know, I marked again, and therefore they were coming up again. And the ones I marked as good, initially was coming back in 15 minutes, but because we blitzed through the flashcards, because there weren't many of them, they came up earlier than that. But then the next time I clicked good, they were going to come up in 1 day's time. And that's how the spaced repetition algorithm works. When you mark something as good, it slightly elongates the interval that you're going to see it next. When you mark it as easy, it massively elongates the interval. And there's tons of YouTube videos exploring the algorithm behind this in depth. But again, this is a beginner's class. In the experts class, which is coming up after a while, we'll dive into the intricacies of the algorithm and how it actually works. But at the moment, we don't really care. We're marking stuff either as again or as good. Maybe as easy if you really feel like it. But now we finish this. And so that shows what a basic flashcard looks like. And if we hit browse and look at capital cities, so these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 flashcards in basic format that we've created at the moment. So that is how you create basic flashcards. Let's move on to the next video where we'll talk about reversed flashcards, and then we'll talk a little bit later about how we can actually make these flashcards better. Because right now, all we're doing is memorizing words. Like, you know, Andorra and Andorra la Vella means nothing to me. All I'm doing is memorizing what the word is. So if it was some kind of trivia thing and I was just trying to memorize all the capitals, then fine. But actually, it would be a lot more useful to actually know where on the map Andorra is and have some kind of image associated with the country and just have an idea of what's going on in Andorra. We'll talk more about that a bit later on. Let's now talk about the second important flashcard type to know about, and that is reverse flashcards. Now, some people won't use this at all, depending on what you're studying, and some people will use it extensively, and some people might just forget about them and just use closed deletions, which we'll talk about later. To be honest, I am in the third camp. I just prefer closed deletions. I tend not to use basic and reverse flashcards, but it's an important concept to keep in mind. So let's go back to our capital cities. Let's press A to add a flashcard, and let's change the type to basic and reversed card. Now, what does that mean? And let's insert a capital. So we've got Australia and Canberra, and I'm going to command enter to create a new flashcard there. Now let's look at what happened. We saw that in creating that one flashcard, we've actually got 2 new cards in our deck to study. I'm going to click study now, and it's going to ask me what's the capital of Australia, and I'm going to say Canberra. Cool, let's say that was easy. But now it's asking me Canberra because it's reversed the flashcard. And because I know this is my capital cities deck, I now need to work out that Canberra is the capital of what? And the answer in this case is Australia. So what's the point of this? Well, the point of this is that when we create a basic flashcard, very often we are creating a one-way connection in our brain. If we just use capital cities as an example that everyone can understand, I was going to do something for medicine, but let's try and keep this broad. If we just had Luanda is the capital of Angola, and I could see Angola and think Luanda, Angola, Luanda, Angola, Luanda, my brain would be very good at coming up with shortcuts. Like maybe I'd think Angola, Luanda, so it starts with an L and that sort of stuff. And that connection would become strengthened because that's what I'm testing. But if, for some reason, I got the word Luanda, I might not necessarily be able to reverse engineer that connection, or if I could, it would take a lot more effort than I would want it to take. Ideally, I would think Luanda and immediately know that it's the capital of Angola, rather than the other way around. And that's the point of a reversed card. So by just putting the information in once, a reversed card allows us to create double the number of flashcards so that instead of just testing a one-way association, we're testing a two-way association. This might be important for you depending on what you're studying. It's sort of important in medicine in some contexts, not in other contexts. There are some areas in which you'll want to be able to reverse this connection. So for example, the classical symptom of cholera is rice water stools. Fine. But if we had cholera rice water stools, I'd be able to create that connection. But I should have a reversed card for that as well, because if I saw a patient with rice water stools or saw that in a question, I'd want to immediately be able to associate that with cholera. So it's helpful to have the reversed card in that sense. So that's what they're for. Sometimes you might need them, sometimes you might not. But let's now move on and talk about closed deletions, which is one of the most powerful features of Anki. All right, welcome back. We've talked about the basic card and the reversed card. Now I'm going to talk about closed deletions, and these will look complicated and they might sound complicated, but it is the single most powerful feature of Anki. So let's go back to our capital cities example. Let's add a card, and we're going to change the type to close. Close basic, let's ignore all the stuff associated with it. Now you'll see text and extra. That's interesting. It's not quite front and back, it's text and extra. And the idea behind closed deletions is that closed deletions function as a fill in the gap, fill in the blank kind of flashcard. And basically it allows us to replace bits of a sentence with a closed deletion, which encourages us to remember that kind of bit of the sentence. And I'll show you what I mean. Let's use an example here. So I'm going to write the capital of Austria is Vienna. Now that is just a sentence. And the point of closed deletions is that it allows us to memorize sentences. So I want to memorize the phrase, the capital of Austria is Vienna. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on Australia. I'm going to select it. And then I'm going to press the close deletion button, which is this icon over here. And you can see that it's got the hotkey Command-Shift-C, but I'm just going to click it for now. And you'll see that now we've got this weird code looking thing surrounding Austria. You'll see these double curly brackets, close double curly brackets, and we've got C1, : Austria. C1 means close deletion 1. It is the first thing that we are close deleting from here. Now let's just add this to the deck and let's see what it looks like. And I'm going to close this. And now we'll see there's one new card. Study now. The capital of something is Vienna. So you saw what happened. We have close deleted that, and that is the phrase that has been deleted. And now let's say I think the capital of London is Vienna. I would press spacebar. Oh, the capital of Austria is Vienna. So you can see that instead of acting as a front and back flashcard, it's acting as a kind of fill in the gap sort of flashcard. Let's create a new one, and this time we'll add a double close. So I'm going to press A to add a new flashcard. I'm going to make sure the type is set to close. By the way, Command N allows you to easily change the type, and you can type it in. So I'm going to type in close. And again, just like learning keyboard shortcuts to get quicker at using Anki, because the more efficient we can use Anki, the more efficiently we can upload stuff to our brains. Let's look at the next one. So let's say the capital of Azerbaijan is Baku. Let's ignore the extra field for now. We'll come back to that later. So now this time I'm going to create two different closed deletions. So I'm going to select Azerbaijan, and I'm going to go Command-Shift-C, and that will turn Azerbaijan into a close one. We can see it says C1. And I'm also going to select Baku and go Command-Shift-C. And you'll see C2 has now appeared by Baku. Now what does this mean? This means that just with a single flashcard, with a single creation on this screen, I have now generated two closed deletions. So let's add this. I'm going to hit Command-Enter to add, close this, and we'll see we've got three new flashcards added. So one of them is the Australia one, and two of them are the Azerbaijan one. So let's have a look. The capital of something is Vienna. Okay, Austria, not Australia, my bad. And let's say easy so it doesn't come up for the next 4 days. But now the capital of something is Baku, and I know the answer is Azerbaijan. And I'm going to hit again. Yep, I'm going to hit number 1. But now the capital of Azerbaijan is what? Well, it's Baku, because we know that. And I'm going to hit good on that one. The capital of Azerbaijan is Baku. And the capital of Azerbaijan is, in fact, Baku. So that gives you an idea of what closed deletions do. It's basically a way for us to create these fill in the gap things very easily. Now let's use a different example. I'm going to create a new deck and call it MISC Medicine for illustration purposes. All right, so I'm going to go in the MISC Medicine for illustration purposes deck. I'm going to hit A to add a card, and I'm going to make sure the type is close, a closed deletion type. And for text, let's find some notes that I was taking yesterday when studying gastrointestinal physiology for one of my supervisions. Here we go. Okay. So this is the sentence that I want to put into Anki. 1200 mils per minute through the splanchnic bed, and I'm referring to blood flow of blood per minute flows through the splanchnic bed. And then Of this, around 75% passes via the intestines to the liver in the hepatic portal vein. The rest represents the oxygenated blood reaching the liver directly via the hepatic artery. Now, the two kind of facts that I want to upload to my brain here are this 1200 mils of blood and this 75%. Because it's important for me to know that 1200 mils of blood per minute goes through the splanchnic bed, which makes up about 20% of the cardiac output. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to Command-Shift-C, and that will turn that into a single close. And then off this, around 75%. So I want to close out the 75 bit so I still see that it's a percentage sign. Now, there is one extra feature that you can do with close deletions. I'll come to that in a moment. So let's hit Add, Close, and Study Now. And it says something of blood per minute flows through the splanchnic bed. So I would think, okay, 1200. So now we've got 1200 mils of blood per minute flows through the splanchnic bed. So that's fine. Let's say that was good. And now of this, around 75% passes via the intestines to the liver. So you can see it's testing me on this one specific fact. And now I know that that's 75%. And the reason it's showing up as blue is because my styling thing is a little bit weird. Normally this would be a white screen, so you'd see it clearly. But if you want, you can change the styling of that. In fact, let's change it. I'm going to edit the content, click on cards, and color, let's make it red. I'll make it red, close. We'll talk more about that in the advanced section, but I was just editing the card just to show you what it looks like. So now of this, around 75% passes via the intestines to the liver in the hepatic portal vein, blah, blah, blah. So you can see that by turning this into a closed card, I've essentially been able to make the process of creating this flashcard a little bit more efficient. I was able to copy and paste information from my lecture notes that I've already taken, and just shove it straight into Anki. Whereas if I was doing it as a basic card, I would say something like, so let's change the type to basic. I would say something like, how much blood goes through the splanchnic circulation per minute? And the answer would be 1200 mils, which I would say is 20% of cardiac output, for example. So that would be how I would make this a basic card. And then I would say 1200 mils of blood goes. So I would write that out, and then I would write 75%. So it would be a lot more effort to upload that fact to my brain with these numbers. It would be a lot more effort to create a basic flashcard for it than a closed deletion, which is why I prefer to use closed deletions for most things personally, but it's personal preference. You can kind of do what you want. Okay, the final thing I want to mention about closed deletions, which is sort of jumping ahead a little bit to how to edit flashcards. But if we press the E button when we're looking at a card, we come into the editing mode and we can edit our card. Now this has a few different benefits that I'll talk specifically about in that video. One thing to keep in mind about closed deletions is that you can add hints. So for example, if I add another double colon here and I say, how many mils of blood? So you'll see it's got close 1, 1200 mils, colon, how many mils of blood. Now, if I close this and we look at this flashcard, this is the flashcard. It says how many mils of blood per minute flows through the splanchnic bed. So it's asking me specifically the question, because one important idea that we're going to keep coming back to is the fact that you want to create these flashcards for your future self. And my future self in 6 months' time, I might not actually remember, especially just like this, you know, this phrase. Initially, the phrase was 1200 mils per minute through the splanchnic bed. If I just close deletion that, then the thing it would ask me would be something per minute through the splanchnic bed. And in 6 months' time, I wouldn't remember that I'm actually referring to a certain amount of blood flow. I might think, am I talking about, you know, hormone concentrations? Am I talking about drugs? Am I talking about something else? I might not entirely remember that it's actually blood flow. So the fact that I can create this hint for myself, how many mils of blood per minute flows through the splanchnic bed, means that my future self in 6 months' time, when I look at this flashcard, is not going to curse my old self. I'm going to think, thank you for taking the time to give me that hint, because now it's obvious to me what sort of answer I'm looking for, rather than trying to think, oh, well, what was I thinking when I first made that flashcard? Which is not the fact that I'm testing. I'm testing my knowledge of how many mils per minute of blood goes through the splanchnic circulation. I'm not testing whether I could read my mind from 6 months ago. So this is a great way of adding hints to our closed deletion. Ideally, our sentence should be designed in a way that means we don't need the hint. So for example, you'll notice that I actually changed it. I said of blood per minute flows through the splanchnic bed. I made it obvious because it's just a reflex at this point that we want to make it really clear for our future selves exactly what's going on. But we have got this hint feature just in case. So that was closed deletions. Closed deletions are the single most powerful feature of Anki, and I'd recommend you use them extensively. But again, in the later on section, we'll talk more about some nuances about when you should and shouldn't use closed deletions. Because it would be very tempting, right, to go through your entire lecture notes, copy and paste everything into Anki and just close delete out the relevant bits. But it's not quite that simple. There are a few nuances, but again, this is a basic course. We're just giving you an introduction so that you can start using Anki. And then over time, you'll develop your own techniques and you'll find loads of tutorials on YouTube, and you'll find my future class about how to optimize Anki for intermediates and experts, where we can dive into these details a little bit more. So we are continuing our topic of closed deletions, and this is a sort of bonus video. This is about 5 minutes of a discussion and a demonstration that me and David, who is a medical student in the US, we were having about how he prepared for the MCAT and scored like incredibly well, like 99.9th percentile in that. And here he is demonstrating how to use closed deletions and a bit of a discussion that we had about it. So if you want, feel free to skip this, but it's just a little bit of a bonus, bit of spice in this class for you. Yeah, over to David. Can you talk a little bit about closed deletion and what does it mean, like essentially what they are?
Yeah, I mean, a closed deletion is essentially a fill in the blank. So you're presented with a short piece of information, and then you're basically asked, like, what is the most important part of that sentence, or you would have to know what's going on in that sentence to answer it. Yeah, pretty much all of the pre-made decks that are used for like medical school training in the US at least use closed deletion at this point. So here's like my step 1 deck. So closed deletion, you can see there's a little ellipsis right here. There's a blank, and then there's a following sentence. So for someone to properly answer this question, they would have to know, what this is. They would have to know what this is. They would have to know which step we're talking about in forming stitch rate. And you click the answer. Okay, it's acetyl-CoA. And then here's a little picture from another popular resource, First Aid. And here's like a little mnemonic that a lot of people can use to memorize this. So it's basically just a fill in the blank. So rather than asking it in a question format, like what molecule does this, it just presents it to you in a sentence. And it's kind of like if you imagine you were reading a textbook. Each sentence in that textbook is probably important, but if you just read, page after page of a textbook, I think the retention is pretty low. So this is a way to kind of like look at each sentence individually, if it were in a textbook, and say, do I understand the point of this sentence? Do I understand the point of this sentence? Do I understand the point of this sentence?
Fantastic. And for these cards, can you just show us what it looks like on edit mode? Like if you were to create a closed deletion card, what would it look like?
Yeah, so here's the edit form. So essentially, if you were to make a card, here, we can like just make our own card.
Oh, if we can make our own card, sure. If we did, for example, the capital of France is Paris.
So we have a sentence right here, and we're saying the capital of France is Paris. So what we would do, we would type this out into the card, and basically up here, I have my card type as a close. So you can change this. There's many different card types. You can do a basic card type, and that's your classic flip it over, where you would ask it a question where you say, like, what is the capital of France? Which is another way to do it. But this closed deletion has become very popular, again, because you can kind of get through the cards more rapidly. So I choose closed deletion, I type out a sentence, and then basically if I wanted to highlight the Paris part, I would highlight it, and then you hit Shift Command C, which is a hotkey shortcut. And this will come up right here. So C1, : Paris. So now we can add this card to the deck, and there's a lot of cool things you can do. You can change the colors, you can change the font. We can, bold, underline, whatever. Click add. Okay, so now we have a card right here. We go to study, and here we go. The capital of France is blank, Paris.
And I guess one of the powers of closed deletions is that you can close deletion multiple things within the sentence. So for example, with that one, we could close delete France as well. And if we were to do that, I wonder what that would look like.
Yeah, so you can do that as well. So same thing. It's the Shift Command C if you're on a MacBook. And so there's 2 ways to do this. You can either make this 2 different cards, where one time the card will show up and Paris will be blanked out, and another time the card will show up and France will be blanked out. Or, so that's how I have the C1, C2. Let me show you what that looks like real quick. So here's one card, capital of France is blank, capital of blank is blank, or is Paris. And then the other option to do is where you could change this if you did both C1. So this is basically saying like close 1, close 2, how many different cards do you want it broken up into? Okay. If I did them both as C1, they would both be, there we go, on the same card.
Ah, okay, which is kind of pointless for this particular card, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I now want to introduce the idea of editing a flashcard as you go along, because editing flashcards is something that a lot of us don't think about doing the first time we start using Anki. We just kind of make the flashcard and then we take it at face value. But actually, one of the great powerful features of Anki is that we can easily edit our flashcards over time to make them more relevant, more useful, more comprehensive, or just to give ourselves some more hints. So I'm going to create some capital cities. Because why not? And we're going to use the close feature for these. So I'm going to say the capital of the Bahamas is Nassau, and we'll close that and close that. Enter the capital of, and I'm going to just copy that phrase so I don't have to continuously type it out. Of Bahrain is Manama. Close, C1, C2. So capital of Bangladesh. Here's Dhaka. Close 1, close 2. And just go for one more. The capital of Barbados is Bridgetown. Okay, close 1, close 2. Right, so we've created these flashcards now. Let's hit add. Let's close. And now we'll see we've got learning 2, which is 2 in progress, and 8 new ones that I've not seen before. So let's hit study now. The capital of something is Baku. Was that Azerbaijan? It was Azerbaijan. Wonderful. But now, as I see that, I'm going to think to myself, okay, well, that's not particularly useful. I would quite like to know where Azerbaijan is on a map. So I'm going to search Azerbaijan on Google, and I'm going to go images. I just want a sort of nice map that tells me where Azerbaijan is. Okay, this is quite helpful. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this image. I'm going to right click, copy image. And then on this flashcard, I'm going to press E for edit, or I could click the edit button if I'm a clicker, but I'm not, so I'm going to press E for edit. And now you'll see there's this extra domain. And the other nice thing about I like about Cloze deletions is we've got this extra field, which we can add to basic and reversed cards, but it's just a bit more complicated. And I can just paste in this image. So now when I see this flashcard, you'll see what happens. So if I hit close, the capital of something is Baku. I'm going to think Azerbaijan. But now I've got the answer, but I've also got this stuff that I've put in the extra column. So now this is infinitely more useful, right? It means I can see, oh, okay, so Saudi, Syria, Iraq, Turkey, Armenia. Oh, I actually had no idea that Azerbaijan was like there. And oh, it looks like Azerbaijan is split up into these 2 different areas. And it's next to Armenia. It's sort of bordered by Georgia. Oh, it's right next to the Caspian Sea. I genuinely had no idea where Azerbaijan was. The thing that I'm testing myself on is still that the capital of Azerbaijan is Baku, which is the point of this capital cities deck. But I've added more information to it to make it more relevant, to make it more contextual. Because the difficulty with flashcards, or rather the trap that we can fall into with flashcards, is that it becomes very easy to just memorize these individual factoids of information. It's sort of like we're trying to see a painting, but we're trying to sort of paint by pixels, right? We're just seeing individual pixels at a time. Whereas it's in the wider context when we zoom out that we actually see the big picture. And this is a problem in everything that we study. Like anytime someone discovers flashcards for the first time, the single biggest mistake people make is that they just start shoving everything into flashcards and trying to memorize stuff without first understanding it. But the point is, this extra feature, when we edit flashcards as we go along, we can just add more context to them so that we understand it. So now, even though I'm trying to memorize the capital of Azerbaijan is Baku, the fact that I've seen this image now and I know where Azerbaijan is in my head, and I've kind of seen this Baku aspect of the image as well, I now have, like, my brain now has more hooks to kind of hook onto to maintain this connection. Whereas before, Azerbaijan was just like a thing. I knew it was a country somewhere in the Middle East. And Baku, never heard of it, didn't even know what it was. Before, these were just words, essentially. But now it's more of a concept. It's more of an understanding in my mind. And that's why it's so important to edit these cards as we go along. So let's do a few more. So let's say that was good. The capital of something is Nassau. I have no idea. Bahamas is Nassau. Okay, so I actually, I think vaguely the Bahamas are in North America. So let me find a decent image. Perfect. This is what I want to see. So I'm going to right click, copy image. I'm going to hit E for edit. Paste it into the extra zone. And now when I close this, I see, the Bahamas are over there and Nassau is one of these little islands that's nearby, and it's sort of between the US and Cuba. Cool. And you know what? Let's add another edit to it, Bahamas flag. I wonder what the flag of the Bahamas looks like. Right click, copy image, edit this flashcard. I've got image 1 over here, and I could paste the flag in there as well. Escape to close, spacebar, and now I see the flag and I see where it is. So again, now I've got more and more elements. Like, now it's no longer just memorizing the capital of the Bahamas is Nassau. It's actually putting some context into it. Let's go away from this and let's now look at MRCP. Okay. So this is like some niche medical stuff. Herpes simplex and encephalitis investigation. PCR? Viral PCR? Or are we talking about CSF? Here we go. Perfect. So I'm going to edit this flashcard and you'll see what it looks like. This is like a complicated flashcard. It's got too much information on it. It's not one of my own flashcards. It's got way too much, but we'll talk more about the minimum information principle later on. But you'll see herpes simplex investigations, close 1. So all of this is under a closed deletion. So all of this stuff. And then in the extra zone, we've added this MRI scan, and we've added this information probably from Radiopedia or some other source, so that when I do this flashcard, I see all of this stuff, which I would quite like to be in red rather than blue anyway, because it's more visible. And I see this extra bit. So again, instead of just memorizing the fact, it gives me some more context. So that is why editing flashcards as we go along is enormously helpful. And these are the ones I made. Meniere's disease management. This has got way too much information on it, but if I edit this. This was a basic card. That's not what I mean. Actually, yeah, I'm going to edit this. So you'll see it's asking me for the management of Meniere's disease. And when I saw that card, I was like, oh God, I don't know what you want from me, because I made this card like 2 years ago. And so I don't know what I was getting at. So I can just edit the flashcard to give myself a hint. I can say brackets, which specialty do you refer to? Which organization do you inform? What do we do about acute attacks? What about prevention? So this is a bad flashcard because it's got way too much information on it. Ideally, I'd actually be exploding these out into individual flashcards. But now if I look, I've edited the flashcards so that instead of it being a case of, look, just try and guess the answer that was in my head 6 months ago, instead it's a case of which specialty do you refer to? Okay, I refer to ENT. Which organization do you inform? The DVLA. What do we do about acute attacks? Prochromazine. What about prevention? Can't remember. Let's have a look. Beta, where is it? Prevention, beta histine and vestibular rehabilitation exercise. Yeah. The reason why this is a bad flashcard is because there is too much information on it. And even though I knew most of that information, there was one piece of information I didn't know. But now I have to come back to the whole flashcard again, which means like as I get hundreds and thousands of flashcards, it becomes a real pain in the bum to review them because I'm having to do so much mental effort to re-review stuff that I already know I know. And part of doing Anki well is doing Anki efficiently. So really I would explode this flashcard into a load of smaller flashcards, and then it would only be this final bit that I actually didn't know and I knew the others, so I'd be able to mark the others as easy or good, and this is the one that I would be able to mark as hard, so to come again. But basically the point of this is to illustrate the idea that as we're going through our flashcards, we definitely want to be editing them as we go along. The thing that I think about is that if there's ever anything that I actually don't understand in my flashcard, if there's a concept that doesn't quite make sense to me, and I've decided it's important for it to make sense to me, then I will add extra information. Because the extra information, it doesn't take any effort to add. It takes like 3 seconds. But your future self will benefit so much from it when you can see all of the context rather than having to Google or search through your textbook to find information. So that was how we edit flashcards. We really want to be editing them as we go along. Let's now talk about a slightly more advanced feature, but I think we can cope with it, and that is image occlusion. Now, what is image occlusion? Well, image occlusion is an add-on, which I don't have yet. So we're going to install the add-on first. So I'm going to go Tools and Add-ons. So to install the add-on for image occlusion enhanced, I'm going to click Get Add-ons. And you'll see to browse add-ons, please click the browse button below. When you found an add-on you like, paste its code below. So I'm going to hit browse add-ons, and it's going to take me to this add-ons for Anki 2.1 or whatever version of Anki you're using at the time of this recording. And I'm going to Control F or Command F, image occlusion. Here we go. This is what I want. I want image occlusion enhanced for Anki 2.1 alpha. And to install the add-on, basically, it'll give you a code. To download this add-on, please copy and paste the following code into Anki 2.1. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to hit OK, and then here we go. Download complete. Please restart Anki to apply changes. And you'll see we've got image occlusion enhanced for Anki 2.1 alpha over here. So let's restart Anki. I'm going to close, and we're going to open up Anki again. Perfect. Now if we go to Tools Add-ons, we'll see image occlusion enhanced has been installed. So what does image occluding do? Basically, image occlusion lets you occlude aspects of an image in order to learn, sort of like automatically generating flashcards from images. So for example, let's use our capital cities. So let's find Australia major cities, and let's find them in a map. And here we go. No, it's a bit small. I'm trying to find something. Okay, let's go here. So I want to copy this image. And in capital cities, this is not really capital cities, but I'm using it as an example to show what image occlusion is. So in capital cities, we're going to add a new card, and we don't need to do anything with this card. What we need to do is we need to open up the image occlusion editor, which you can see a button over here for it, add image occlusion, Command Shift O. So let's hit Command Shift O. Now we can add image occlusions here. So let's say I wanted to memorize what the different bits of Australia were. You'll see on the side it's automatically selected the rectangle tool, and I can select it by pressing the R, or the ellipse tool by pressing the E, or you can just click on it. But it's automatically on the rectangle tool. And what I can do is I can just click and drag, and you'll see Western Australia gets hidden. I can click and drag Northern Territory and it disappears. Click and drag Queensland and it disappears. Let's make it a bit bigger. South Australia and New South Wales, Tasmania, Victoria, any other regions of Australia. Cool, that's fine. So now we've occluded all these aspects of the image. And essentially what the image occlusion add-on is going to do is that it's going to generate flashcards for us for all of these. So I'm going to say, we've got the option now. We can say hide all, guess one, or hide one, guess one. Now, these have different use cases. In this example, because we've got another example coming up, I'm going to say hide one, guess one. So now you'll see at the bottom it says 7 cards added. So I'm going to click close. And now if I go back to my deck, you'll see there's 15 new cards. The capital of Azerbaijan is Baku. Yes, wonderful, easy. The capital of the Bahamas is Nassau. Yes, easy. In fact, I should probably change that. I should change it to the capital of the Bahamas is Nassau, because it gave me too much of a hint because it said the capital of the. So now the capital of something, the Bahamas is Nassau. Let's say it's easy. Fine, 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 fine. Okay, here we go. Now we're on the image occlusion stuff. Now you'll see we've got the image, and you'll see that one aspect of it has been occluded. It's gone red. And you'll see that all the others are visible because I went for the hide one, guess one. So it's only hiding one of them. I could have gone for hide all, guess one, which we'll see an example of a bit later on. But now I think that's Western Australia. Western Australia. So we see that it's appeared, and we can click toggle masks. So now that I know it's Western Australia, I can have good on that one. But now we'll see that another one has been occluded, and that is Northern Territories, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. And we're seeing them in that order because we don't have many flashcards in this deck, and because I've set them to be in order, we can randomize the order if we want. And over time, as certain of these are going to be easier than others, it will start to reset. But you kind of get the idea. This is a very good way to memorize a diagram or a map or a flowchart or things like that. Medical students use these a lot for anatomy. And now we've got two segments from Clara and David talking us through how to use the image occlusion enhanced feature, just to give you another example of how this sort of stuff works in real life. But if you've got the objective, then feel free to move on from the video. So this is David and Clara explaining image occlusion. I wonder if it would be easier if you can show us how to make an image occlusion card just using a simple image or something in the practice deck that we've created.
Okay, so I've gotten this image from Google, and now we want to basically use it to study our anatomy. So we'll have to change the card type. So we had it on closed deletion, but now we're going to be using an image occlusion. So here we have the image pulled up. We can basically blank them out by just dragging this box, make several of them. And then you can either hide them all, guess one. We'll do that. I think that's the best way to go. And so now we have an image. We've kind of blanked out what's going on with the words. Let's get past these ones. So here is an example of image occlusion. So you can see we've kind of blanked out everything that's going on of the forearm anatomy. So, I could be sitting here and I could like think in my head, okay, what is this? This is like obviously a nice netter's picture. It's color coded and stuff. And it's always the joke that this is not what the cadavers look like on the actual exam. But I think this is a good way, I think anatomy is like a great subject. But I think this is a good way to start learning anatomy, learn like how things should look, where they should go. And then you can get in the cadaver lab and kind of find out. So I'd be like, okay, think about what it is in my head, and I can test myself right then and there. And I could go to the next one. Okay, what is this? Think about it. And then again, at the bottom, you can see if I didn't know what this was, I could click again. If I did know what it was, it'll show up in 10 minutes. If I thought this was super easy, there's no way I'm going to forget this, I could click easy and I won't see it again for 4 days.
And I guess the reason that you're not showing the other three is because then just by process of elimination, you'll just know that pronated terrors is the fourth one.
Yeah, I think that for me, that would be a true point, but you can do it. Like I could choose to show the other three and just have one of them blanked out, but it kind of depends. It's kind of a personal preference. That's the thing about Anki. It's like kind of confusing to learn because there's so much that you can do and so many things you can change. But that's totally another option, is that you could just blank out one at a time if you'd like.
Yeah. Can you show us your process for making image occlusion-y things from like a new lecture, for example?
So I really love the Teach Me Anatomy diagrams. I think they're really clear.
So you've copied the image from Google.
Yeah, I've searched up the image, I've copied it, and then gone into Anki and pressed add, and then put it into lower limb anatomy deck. I've copied it, and then like it comes up automatically if you copy.
Oh, so if you just paste it, it automatically comes up with image occlusion mode.
So you need to like copy the image on Google and then go onto the image occlusion thing, but the image comes up automatically, and then change it to green. I try and like make the labels like the same size, because otherwise it like I know like what muscle.
You know that flexor digitorum profundus is going to be a little bit of a longer word then. Yeah. So you're just clicking and dragging, you're occluding the image. Yeah.
And then I click hide all, guess one, because am I right that hide one, guess one like leaves the others like...
It does, but often if there are only 4 muscles in the posterior compartment of the leg, process of elimination, you'll know exactly what it is, which is not helpful.
So that's why I do that. So then I've just done hide all, guess one, and then just get rid of it.
All right, so those were a few different use cases for the image occlusion enhanced add-on. Like I said, installing an add-on, bit of an advanced feature, but to be honest, you saw how easy it was to actually install that add-on. And image occlusion is a great way of putting image-related things into our memory. So medical students use it a lot for anatomy, as you've seen. Equally, if we're memorizing the Krebs cycle, and there's all different aspects of it, you can use image occlusion for that. If you want to learn the different aspects of Australia or the different states in America or something, you can image occlude the relevant bits that you want for that. All right, welcome back. In this video, we are talking about how to install Anki on different platforms. So I'm just going to search Anki on Google. It is apps.ankiweb.net. The annoying thing about different platforms is that there are lots of fake versions of Anki. So this is the official website. This is the one you want, and this is the only one that you want. You can download the Windows version, the Mac version, the Linux version, iPhone and Android. Now, if you're on an iOS device, the one you want is Anki Mobile. So let's open it up. It is Anki Mobile Flashcards. This is what it's called. And it costs about $25 or £23. Now people are going to see that and think, oh my God, how the hell can I possibly pay £25 for software? If genuinely you can't afford to pay £25 for software, then that's absolutely fine. I mean, I get that currency exchange rates in different countries are such that £25 is a hell of a lot of money. But if you're a student in the UK, I can pretty much guarantee you spent more than £25 wasted on like a meal out with friends. Like literally, if you really can't afford this, like it's the single most worthwhile investment you can possibly make. In fact, if you can afford an iPhone period, chances are almost certainly you can afford Anki Mobile Flashcards and you should get Anki Mobile Flashcards. It is an absolute no-brainer. I cannot imagine a single circumstance in which someone realistically can afford an iPhone, but can't afford to spend $25 on an incredible app. This, like buying this app, this is the only part of Anki that costs money. It is the thing that funds the development of the whole ecosystem. It is an absolute no-brainer. If you're going to be using Anki for any length of time at all, even if you're only going to be using it for a year, even if you're only going to be using it for a few weeks, the amount of stress that Anki takes away, if you can have it on your phone in a nice app, is astronomical. It is totally worth the 25 quid. Please just buy the app if you have an iPhone. If you have an Android, then you don't need to buy the app because it's free. You can get Anki Droid, which is here. This is what it looks like on the Google Play Store. This is the one, Anki Droid. And because there's so many copycats, you'll always be sure to get the right one by going on it from the Anki website. There is another one. I think it's called, on iOS, it's called Anki App. And it's not the one that you want. This is a fake app. This is absolutely terrible. You do not want Anki App Flashcards. You do not want Anki App. You want specifically Anki Mobile Flashcards, the one that has the official Anki logo with the $25 price tag. But let's say you can't afford it for whatever reason. You can just go on your mobile device and I will show you. Go on Safari and you can go on AnkiWeb.net. Anki Web is a free companion to the computer version of Anki. Anki Web can be used online to review when you don't have access to your home computer, blah, blah, blah. So I can log in. I can type in my login details. Let me find the right account. I have so many different Anki accounts. And now you'll see I have all of my flashcards on Anki Web. So if I wanted to, I could review my capital cities and I could click study now. The capital of Azerbaijan is Baku. Yes, good. The capital of the Bahamas is Nassau. You'll see that it hasn't quite synced from the previous video because Anki synchronizes once you close it, but we'll talk more about that in the next video. So I can literally do all of my flashcards from my phone. I don't need the app, but because I have the app installed, it just makes the whole process a lot easier. So if I hit synchronize, oh, I'm logged into a different account, but I'll explain the synchronization in the next video. But basically, there's no excuse for not having Anki on your phone. Please buy the app. It is totally worth it if you're on an iOS device. You can probably afford it. But if not, you can always use AnkiWeb.net and you can just log in directly on there. So that was Anki on different platforms. It's obviously helpful to have Anki across all the platforms. I have Anki on my iPhone, on my iPad, on my Mac. And I can access Anki Web if I'm at work and I'm just using the crappy Windows computers at work and I've got like a spare half an hour. I will often go onto Anki Web on the computer rather than kind of slide on my phone. Go on Anki Web on the computer and just bash through some flashcards. That's a very easy way of using Anki across different platforms. But remember, the official downloads are on the official Anki website. Please don't get hoodwinked by the myriad fake Anki apps. The ones on the website are the ones that you want. So it's the final video of the basic mechanics section. And in this video, we're talking about how to synchronize stuff to Anki Web. Now, Anki is fantastic because they've got this free synchronization platform where you can just automatically or semi-automatically keep your decks and flashcards and all your revisions and your spaced repetition schedule. You can keep it synchronized across your different devices because as we discussed in the previous video, you're going to install Anki on whatever device you have. And preferably you're going to buy the iOS app, but you can always use Anki Web if you don't. If you can't afford it for whatever reason. Anyway, how do we sync? Well, we can make our flashcards, it's all well and good, but then we can hit the sync button, shortcut key Y, and initially it's going to say a free account is required to keep your collection synchronized. Please sign up for an account, then enter your details below. So I'm going to sign up for an account. I've got loads of Anki accounts. So your email is ankitest@aliabdaal.com, ankitest@aliabdaal.com, and let's use this very strong password because why not? Actually, no, that's not. Let's use something easy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've just signed up. Sign up. Not now. I'm gonna accept some terms and conditions, bloody bloody blah. Now I've got an email confirmation. Let's open up that. Please verify your email address. Verify email. Now, thank you. Your email address has been verified and your account is fully active. Wonderful. Now I can type in Anki test at aliabdaal.com. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm gonna hit enter. Okay. Now, because I've got stuff here, your decks here on Anki Web differ in such a way they can't be merged together. So it's necessary to overwrite something. So initially, the very first time, I want to hit upload to Anki Web because at the moment in my new Anki Web account, I just have a single default deck, whereas I've got like an absolute ton of decks on my local computer. So I want to upload all of the decks on my local computer up to Anki Web so that I can synchronize stuff. I'm going to hit upload to Anki Web. And now you're going to see your collection was successfully uploaded to Anki Web. Perfect. And we can see the synchronization button is like moving along. So now in theory, if I go on decks, oh, look. This is my fake account, ankitest.aliabdaal.com, and we can see I've used up 46 megabytes, of which 34 megabytes is media, because a lot of my decks have images in them, so it takes some time to upload. And like literally everything is now on Anki Web. This is absolutely incredible. Like, look at this. This is sick. Everything's just been instantly uploaded. This is how it works. So now if we want to synchronize, basically whenever we want to synchronize, we can hit the synchronization button, or when we hit the close button, oh, it's still synchronizing stuff because there's a load of data to synchronize. But essentially when we hit the close button, Anki will automatically sync all the changes up to Anki Web. Now I'm gonna go on my phone and I'm gonna log into my Anki account on the app, and then I'll be able to download the synchronized deck. So let's go on Anki. At the moment, I've just got a default deck. This is what it's gonna look like when you first install it. And I'm going to profiles, add a new profile, Anki test. Cool. I'm going to hit synchronized and it says, please enter your Anki Web details. So I'm going to type in Anki test at aliabdaal.com. Password we said was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now this is upload to Anki Web or download from Anki Web. And the answer is we want to download from, because you'll see on this device, I only have one single deck with nothing in it. I don't want to overwrite all my decks on Anki Web by uploading that. Instead, I want to download from Anki Web because Anki Web is like the source of truth for what like it should be. So I'm going to hit download from Anki Web. And now you'll see everything is going. It's all synchronizing. It's downloading a ton of stuff because there's a load of images to download. Normally it wouldn't take this long. It's taking this long because I've got loads of pre-made decks that have tons and tons of images in them for medical exams, but it will be practically instant if this is the first time that you're using Anki. Gonna order some takeaway while this synchronizes because there's like hundreds of megabytes to download. Ah, yes, we are done. Look, now you'll see that all of my decks have synchronized to Anki Web and now they've been downloaded onto my phone. So now everything is on my phone and everything is offline. So even if I don't have internet access, I now have all 650 megabytes worth of data, of which there are tens of thousands of like medical type flashcards, which I can do on an aeroplane in the middle of the Himalayas, wherever I want. So yeah, capital cities. I've got my Western Australia. So I just tap and I can see, okay, it's good. I've got, is that Queensland? No, it's that, what is that? Northern Territories, fine. Queensland, whatever. Let's go back to decks. Let's look at my USMLE deck. In acute gastritis, disruption of what type of barrier occurs? Disruption of the mucosal barrier. Yes, perfect. That's very good. What is the most common cause of chronic gastritis? Helicobacter pylori, I think. Wonderful. How can brain injury cause acute gastritis? Well, you can get a Cushing ulcer. Cushing ulcer, caused by increased vagal stimulation, which increases ACH and return acid production. So I didn't know all the details of that, so let's go again. And so on. So I can go back on decks, and then when I'm done, I can hit synchronize, and this is going to be much quicker because all it's done is it's uploaded the changes that I made. So it's going to recognize that I did those 4 flashcards, and it's going to update the algorithm accordingly, and everything is synchronized on Anki Web completely for free. This is absolutely incredible. I can see why Anki is an absolutely life-changing app for a lot of people. So that was how we synchronize to and from Anki Web. Remember, the first time you want to upload to Anki Web, and then the next time around you want to download from Anki Web, and then it'll figure out what's going on, and then you won't need to worry about download anymore. You'll just hit the synchronize button and you'll be sorted. The nice thing about Anki Web while we're here is that you can also share your decks. You can make your decks public. When I was in my second year of med school, I made loads of Anki decks and I made them public, and I shared them with people in the year below and friends in my year group and stuff, and that was fun. Yeah. There's just loads of different ways to use Anki, and you can also download other people's decks from Anki. Probably won't talk about that in this class. We'll talk about that in the next one because there's a lot of kind of advanced tips and tricks for how to use pre-made decks properly. But this is just an introduction to Anki. So that was how synchronization works. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next segment of the course. All right, welcome to the second section of the class. And in this bit. We're going to be going over some real world examples of how me and a few other people that I've interviewed over the past few weeks, how we actually create Anki cards in kind of real life based on our material, and then how we review those Anki cards and how we would do things like improve the cards over time and stuff like that. And the idea is that as we're watching these videos, I'll kind of explain what the philosophy is behind what makes a good flashcard. There's loads of other videos on YouTube that discuss this. Prerak Jithani has some very good ones. He was one of the guys that I interviewed for ages. There's some bonus segments of him in this class, but now let's jump into it. And so we're going to start by talking about how to make Anki flashcards from a lecture. So I've got my Anki up and I'm going to use, in fact, I'm going to use my lecture notes. So I'm going to open up PDF Expert and I'm going to, let's say, I don't know, renal physiology. Let's go through renal physiology. Basically what I'm looking for is that, well, firstly, I want to understand the content, obviously. Hopefully you've seen my class on how to study for exams. That talks about the importance of understanding the content first. And like for me, I'm pretty sure, now that I've been a doctor for 2 years and been studying physiology for a while, I'm pretty sure I understand most of renal physiology, but I still need to memorize certain aspects of it. So I'm going to create a new deck and I'm going to call it HOM because that is the subject, HOM for homeostasis, first year physiology. And I'm going to see which aspects of the lecture notes I can convert into flashcards. And the philosophy that I've got while I'm doing this is I'm thinking, what is an examinable fact that I need to memorize that I can't just rely on understanding for? Those are my 3 things. Examinable fact that I need to memorize that I can't just rely on understanding for. Something like, where are the kidneys? I don't need to memorize where the kidneys are because I know like where the kidneys are. I know they're over there. Something like, what is the blood supply to the kidneys? I just know it's the renal arteries. Like, it's not the sort of thing that I need to memorize because I've long understood that fact. It's as ingrained within me as the fact that Paris is the capital of France. But as I'm going through these lectures, I'm going to look for information that I could potentially turn into a flashcard. And as we're going through, I'll explain why I'm converting certain bits into different flashcards. Okay, this is an interesting one. So this graph basically shows, essentially in the body, we have about 42 liters of water. The intracellular fluid, i.e. the water inside cells, makes up 25 liters. The interstitial fluid, i.e. the water around the cells, makes up 13 liters. And the plasma, i.e. blood, makes up about 3 liters of fluid. These are important numbers to remember. And so I'm going to create a flashcard for each of them. It's going to be a basic flashcard because it doesn't need to be special. Actually, no, you know what? Let's make a closed deletion flashcard out of this because then I can say body compartments, intracellular fluid equals interstitial fluid equals and plasma equals body compartments. How much fluid do we have in each? So I can say interstitial fluid is about 25 liters, 13 liters and 3 liters. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to close all of these. So Command Shift C, Command Shift C, Command Shift C. But what I'm thinking about is, for example, if I do them like this, you'll see they're all C1s. That means that when I add this card, now it's going to ask me for the answer for all of them, and it's just going to create one flashcard. Because if I go in the edit mode, you'll see C1 just means kind of the first close, the first close, the first close. All of these are in one. So the thing I'm thinking of in my head is it important for me to be able to generate this information without knowing the others? For example, if I did it as C1, C2, and C3, just to give you an example and saved that. Now, if I saw that, I know the answer is 25 liters, but I'm thinking in 6 months' time, if I didn't know that that was 25 liters, I'd probably be able to actually work it out based on these 2 numbers because I just know that the overall is about 41, 42 liters. So that's why the philosophy here is that actually I'm going to convert them all into a single close because that is actually the important information I need. As a doctor and as someone studying physiology, I should be able to just reel these numbers off of the top of my head. So it's really important for me to know this as one unit of information. So when I see this flashcard, I can see, okay, 25 liters intracellular, 13 liters interstitial, and 3 liters in the plasma. Boom, absolutely right. And while I'm here, I'm just gonna screenshot. Oh gosh, this keyboard is not working. Let's switch keyboards. On a Mac, where's my diagram? You would use Command, Control, Shift, and 4, and then that turns into a selection. And I can just copy that whole segment and just paste it into extra. So now if I close this and look at this flashcard again, now that I've got the answer, once I've active recalled it, once I've tested myself on the flashcard, I now see all this information. And again, like, it's so useful putting this extra information in flashcards because now I've got this visual of the kind of 25 liters intracellular fluid, the 13 liters interstitial fluid, and the 3 liters of plasma. So that would be one card that I would make from this using closed deletions. Here's another interesting one. 55% of the blood is actually plasma. And of that, 91% is water, 7% is proteins, and 2% is electrolytes. Now, I sort of knew that, but I didn't really have these numbers off the top of my head. And I think it's helpful in terms of understanding physiology and understanding fluid bands around the body, just to appreciate what these numbers are. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say 55% of the blood is plasma. How much of that is water? So how much of the plasma is water by percentage? And because this is a closed deletion card, within the text of the card, I'm going to say 91% water, and I'm going to close that with Command-Shift-C. I'm going to add this, close. So this is this one. Let's say that was easy. 55% of the blood is plasma. How much of the plasma is water by percentage? The answer is 91. This is basically a basic card in closed deletion format. So alternatively, what I could have done is I could have created a new card. I could have switched the type to basic, and I could have said what percentage of plasma is actually water, and the answer would be 91. Yeah, that would be one way of doing it. But because for me, I tend to use closed cards quite a lot, if I've got a card that's actually just a basic question and answer, I would still just use the closed deletion thing. The other interesting thing about the closed thing is that it automatically comes with the extra field. So now what I can do in the extra field is I can just copy and paste, boom. I'm going to screenshot that, just paste it in there, and now that's automatically in there, right? So now this flashcard is a lot more useful, because now when I see this in 6 months' time, or however, I'm going to see it tomorrow or later today, 91% water, but it also gives me the context. I've explained that actually 91% water, 7% proteins, 2% electrolytes, and this is a diagram just to illustrate it a bit more. And it was so easy for me to just screenshot that stuff and just shove it into Anki. I might as well. Like, this would be a lot less useful if I just memorized 91% water in isolation, but now I've got it in context and I understand it's with proteins and electrolytes. So for example, if I were to add more cards here, I would say, let's actually copy this stuff. How much of the plasma is proteins by percentage? And then I would actually say which proteins, which is technically another question. It sort of goes against the minimum information principle, which is the idea that only one fact per flashcard. But because I know that actually memorizing the number 7 is not particularly useful, in the context of my subject, it's more useful for me to be able to reel off albumin, fibrinogen, globulins, etc., as being the other things on this list, which is why I'm adding more than one piece of information to this particular flashcard. And this is why creating flashcard gets so complicated, because it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and like what the objective is. So actually, let's just fill this out. So I'm going to say 7% proteins, albumin, fibrinogen, globulins, other, etc. And I could just copy and paste that from the lecture notes. Close deletion that with Command-Shift-C, and then copy and paste all of this stuff. And maybe in the next series, we'll talk about add-ons to make this process a bit more efficient, but we're trying to keep things simple here. So now how much of the plasma is water? It's 91%, and I've got my illustration. Good. How much of the plasma is proteins? Well, it's about 7%, and the proteins are albumin, fibrinogen, and globulins, amongst other things, mostly albumin. Great. So that is how I would make kind of fairly basic flashcards just based off of this. Let's make another one while you're here. What is Van 't Hoff's equation? And the answer is pi v equals nRT. So I'm going to write pi v equals nRT because I can't be bothered to find the symbol for pi. And I'm just going to copy and paste this whole thing in the extra tab, and I'm going to close out pi v equals nRT. Now let's add it with Command spacebar, close this. How much of the plasma percentage is proteins, blah, blah, blah. Let's say that was easy. What is Van Hoff's equation? Well, it's pi v equals nRT, but alone, that fact is totally useless, which is why in the extra column, I've screenshotted the information there. And again, just to reiterate, it takes me 0 effort to screenshot stuff, but my future self will be so glad that I did it. So that was an example of 3 different flashcards that I've made just of this one lecture. And the question I'm thinking is, do I need to memorize it, or can I just kind of understand? Van 't Hoff's equation, I kind of knew that already, but it's an eponymous thing, like it's named after someone. So, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, I might not specifically remember, like I would know the equation pi v equals nRT, but I might not specifically remember that it was Van 't Hoff's equation, which is why it's helpful to create the flashcard for that. Whereas I probably wouldn't need a flashcard for speed equals distance over time, just because it's so bond or obvious, and I just know it. So the point that I want to make throughout this whole thing is that we don't want to just be making flashcards willy-nilly about everything. We only want to make flashcards for the things that we think we might need a flashcard to remember. And that actually is partly why I don't like making flashcards the first time I'm studying a new subject. Because the first time you're studying anything, it is all completely new to you. The first time I'm looking at capitals of the world, the fact that Paris is the capital of France is a completely new fact to me. And so I'd make a flashcard about it. But really, I don't need to make a flashcard about it because perhaps that's a bad example. But like, as you become more familiar with a topic, you can start taking different aspects of that topic for granted. There's an example that I like to give. Like a few months ago, a student emailed me asking me to look at his flashcards. He was starting first year of medical school. Now, I think it was like A-level biology. And one of his flashcards was, where is the heart? And the answer was, in between the lungs. That's a pretty ridiculous flashcard to make because obviously everyone knows the heart is in between the lungs. You don't need a flashcard for that. Also, it's a bad flashcard because where is the heart? Like, 2 years from now, when you look at that flashcard, as a medical student or as a doctor, I might think, well, it's sort of in the middle mediastinum. It's surrounded by the anterior and the posterior mediastinum. It's got the pericardium around. Like, I'm not really sure what the question is asking, right? If the flashcard was between which two organs is the heart, then it's more obvious that, okay, the lungs. But then it's a pointless flashcard to create because you don't need a flashcard to know that the heart is in between the lungs. You can just take it for granted. So that's kind of the impression that I want to leave you with, that Anki is fantastic. Anki is amazing. But you really want to avoid flashcard overload. And one way to avoid flashcard overload is to only make a flashcard if you think you might need a flashcard to remember it. And if something is super, super easy, then yeah, you just mark it as easy and it kind of ends up getting buried. But yeah, we don't want to be overloaded with flashcards. So that was this segment of the video. In the next one, we'll continue making some more flashcards and I'll just share some more thoughts along the way. All right, welcome back. In this video, we are talking about how to make flashcards from a video. Let me find a random lecture video on YouTube related to physiology, probably. I'll, again, try and go over what sort of flashcards I would make from that particular video. So let's look at, I don't know, pulmonary surfactant. Looks good. Double speed, obviously.
Welcome to 5 Minute School.
Ah, here we go. So already we have an examinable fact here. So I'm going to add to this deck. And if we look at the bottom of this video, which is hard to see because the player's in the way. Oh, let's just enlarge this. Pulmonary surfactant is secreted into the alveoli from type 2 alveolar cells.
How an increased amount of surface tension can result in...
And so the examinable fact here is, what cell type secretes surfactant? What cell secretes surfactant? And I'm going to say type 2 alveolar cell. And because this is a close card, because that's how I roll, I'm going to close that out. And then, you know what, might as well just screenshot this from the video and shove it in the extra column, just because why not? So that's a useful fact for me to memorize.
So we're going to mention the mechanisms in place which prevent the collapse of the alveoli, and it's due to something which is...
Oh, interesting. So I actually want to do an image occlusion here, because I think it's useful for me to understand what a type 1 alveolar cell is and what a type 2 alveolar cell is. So I'm going to screenshot that, copy it to my clipboard, and I'm going to use Command-Shift-O to open up image occlusion. It's going to automatically paste in this thing, and I should be able to scroll around. Good. So we've got the rectangle selected. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to get rid of that. Let's get rid of that as well. Alveolar macrophage, isophactum, pulmonary capillary, erythrocyte. That's all fairly obvious stuff. So I want to hide all of them because if I do hide one, guess one, it's going to show me all of them and ask me to guess one of them. But if it, for example, shows me alveolar type 2 cell, I know that the other one must be alveolar type 1 cell. So in this context, it's better for me to hide all and guess one. And now we'll see 3 cards have been added. Great, let's continue.
So pulmonary surfactant is secreted, as I said, by the type 2.
Okay, here we go. This is interesting. What are the 3 things that makes up surfactant? Basically 1, 2, 3. It is phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylglycerol, and surfactant proteins. I probably could get a molecule diagram. So surfactant. It's going to show me the structure of these bits. This is an image of phosphatidylcholine. So let's copy, shove that into the extra column. So now I can see phosphatidylcholine and be like, okay, hydrophobic chains, polar head groups, blah, blah, blah. But these are the 3 things that makes up surfactant. And again, do I want to do this as a single card or as 3 different cards? I think I want to do it as a single card. And again, this is somewhat controversial because there's more than one piece of information per card. But again, I kind of know that if I get asked a question in real life, it'll be, what are the 3 bits that make up pulmonary surfactant? And I want to be able to reel them off the top of my head. So yes, it would be more effort for me to recall this card when I see it, but I know that in the context that this information is important, it's important for me to know about all 3 components. So actually I could have just done a basic card first, but I'm just going to select everything, close it with a single close rather than having to select each of them individually. Let's hit the add button. And now we'll see 55% of the blood is plasma. Well, that is 91%. Good. What is Van Hoff's equations? Pi v equals nRT. What cell secretes surfactant? Alveolar type 2 cells. Good. Now this is an alveolar type 1 cell. Good. That is an alveolar type 2 cell. Good. And that is an alveolar macrophage. Good. What are the three things that make up surfactant? Phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylglycerol, and hydrophobic heads. Hydrophobic surfactant proteins. No, it's more like hydrophobic tails. Whatevs. Let's say good for that one, and now I know what it's talking about. Easy, done.
Interspersed between water molecules at the
Okay, so he said that pulmonary surfactant is removed by alveolar macrophages. Now, I didn't actually know that, so I'm going to create a card for it. So, surfactant is secreted by type 2 alveolar cells, but taken up by alveolar macrophages. Now, this is actually the perfect opportunity to use a double close. So I can close that, I can close that. So that works. So now if I add this, I've added two cards. Surfactant is secreted by type 2 alveolar cells. Yep. But it's taken up by alveolar macrophages. So now I've got these two facts that I've got from this lecture and put it into a flashcard. And this is a fairly simple flashcard. And again, if I wanted to, I could copy and paste this diagram. So let's edit this, extra, paste the diagram in, close. So now it's going to appear in all of these close deletion flashcards. So hopefully you can get an idea of how I'm making the flashcards as I'm going along. Again, just to reiterate, I'm asking myself, do I really need a flashcard for this? This is not the first time I'm going over the topic. So already, if there's something that I don't immediately think, oh yeah, I know that, then I think, okay, maybe I need a flashcard for it because clearly I haven't remembered it after all these 8 years of being in medicine. So that's sort of step number one. And step number two is I'm trying to think about how I can turn it into the simplest flashcard. But also while I'm doing that, I'm thinking about how is this information actually going to be tested? Is there any point in me knowing the structure of pulmonary surfactant based on those three things in isolation? Or would it be better if I could just reel off the three things that make up pulmonary surfactant, just like in a row? And in that context, that would make sense. So again, just reiterating the point that design your flashcards based on the format and the method that you're going to be tested in. And remember, you want to minimize the number of flashcards ideally, so we don't want to be making flashcards on absolutely everything because then we get too many flashcards and it takes ages. We want to try and keep that process as efficient as possible. So thanks for watching, and let's move on to the next video. All right, welcome back. In this video, I want to show you how I memorized bunches and bunches of paragraphs and paper references and kind of long bits of text for my psychology essays that I had to write during my third year of med school. I actually made a YouTube video sort of about this. It's called How I Ranked First at Cambridge University, and it's done quite well because it's a good clickbait title. But this is my third year psychology deck. Actually, we'll click study now and we'll see how much of this I remember. Tranel and Damasio, 1985. I have absolutely no idea what I was talking about. While the prosa prognostic person minor recognition, they so SCR to familiar. What the hell does SCR mean? Clearly I knew this back in the day. Let's hit browse. And I'm looking for my third year psychology deck. And let's sort it alphabetically. Okay, so basically the way that I was using Anki for this is that I was creating essay plans, like I was creating structures of essays that I was going to commit to memory using spider diagrams and mind maps. For example, in my mind map, I would have the phrase abnormal basal ganglia function in schizophrenia, functional neuroimaging evidence, which, you know, this was an essay about schizophrenia. We were looking at what is the evidence that in people with schizophrenia, the basal ganglia, which is a part of the brain, is abnormal. And the thing that I wanted to memorize was this study from Honey et al. 2005, where they did functional MRI showing brain responses to a simple target detection tasks in groups of controls in schizophrenic. The data were overactive in schizophrenia and the putamen was underactive in schizophrenia. So this is not the minimum information principle, but actually it kind of is. Like the minimum information principle is that we should have a single chunk of information for every flashcard. This paper is a chunk of information. Like I need to know what the reference is. I need to know who did the study, and I need to know what the study showed. And there's no point in me knowing the name and then creating a separate flashcard for what the study showed, because that's not how I'm gonna recall that information. I'm gonna recall that information by seeing this on a plan and thinking, okay, I'm writing this essay about schizophrenia in the exam. I need some evidence that shows that in schizophrenia, there is some kind of brain structural changes. Ah, I remember from my flashcard, I know I've got that study from Honey et al. 2005, where they showed that in schizophrenia, the caudate is underactive and the putamen is overactive. Other way around, the caudate are overactive and the putamen is underactive, whatever. But the point is that I'm using flashcards to create these kind of links. Equally, amygdala overactivity in depression, is it simply caused by medication or depressed state? And then I've got this other chunk of paragraph that I've memorized. Again here, anxiety, is it good for you? In lab studies, first consulted 100 years ago, a small degree of anxiety has been found to improve performance on lab tasks. Too much anxiety interferes with performance. You know, this is like a whole chunk of information that I've memorized because anxiety is it good for you is the cue that I know I'm going to recall when it comes to writing my essay. So again, this is not the way that I'd recommend using Anki. If you're new to Anki, then this is sort of a brain processing intensive way of using Anki to memorize chunks of information. But this worked really well for me. And because of using Anki, I was able to memorize kind of at least 10 references for every single essay that I was writing in the exam. I'd memorized at least 50 essays, of which like 8 came up in the exam out of the 12 that we had to write. So that was absolutely perfect. But this took me absolutely ages, like, you know, making these flashcards and reviewing them every single day without fail. Ultimately, all of this information was uploaded to my brain, but this is a difficult way to use Anki. A much easier way to use Anki is by using Anki, keeping your flashcards as short as possible so that you can just like blitz through the reviews. Whereas for one of these, Bree-Natal 2000, there's no way I can blitz through this review. Like back in the day when I was studying for this exam, I would just kind of scribble out what the paper reference was and what they showed and kind of recite the story to myself in my head. And that would take 30 seconds to 1 minute, sometimes even longer, per flashcard. And you know, if I had thousands of flashcards, it just wouldn't have worked. So I had fewer flashcards. But it's a lot easier to use Anki when you're just kind of blitzing through small snippets of information, individual factoids, rather than this method of memorizing entire chunks of information. But I just wanted to put this video in here to show you that you can use Anki to memorize chunks of information. Again, it really just depends on in what format are you actually going to be tested. Are you going to be asked to write an essay in an exam with the book closed where you have to recite these references from memory? Some would argue it's kind of a pointless way to be tested. I would agree, but I don't make the rules. This is just, you know, how you play the game. Or are you going to be tested in a sense that it's going to be multiple choice, where it's based on recognition rather than generation of information? All these things kind of dictate how you should use your flashcards. But in this class, I just want to show you that there are a few different ways of doing it. But if in doubt, stick to the minimum information principle, 1 fact per flashcard, 1 chunk of information per flashcard. Don't overcomplicate it like I've done here. So I hope this just gave you a kind of brief look at how this stuff worked. And feel free to slow this video down if you actually want to see what I'm going over. All right, in this section, we're talking about how to optimize Anki, how to use Anki properly. And remember, this class is still aimed at people who are brand new to Anki. There's a huge rabbit hole. You can really go down into the weeds with Anki and how to optimize it and all the different settings and all that kind of stuff. We'll save that for the future class where we kind of aim it more at intermediates and experts. But in this section of the class, I just want to go over kind of some best practices, ways in which we can optimize our Anki usage to get the best bang for our buck, even as beginners. So in this video, this is going to be sort of a bonus segment. It's an interview that I did with Premade Juthani, who is a medical student YouTuber. He's got a YouTube channel where he breaks down so much stuff about Anki, and you should definitely watch all of his videos about Anki if you're really interested in exploring this topic deeper. But in this short segment, he and I are just kind of discussing and showing on screen how we would improve flashcards by kind of building on them and like kind of what makes a good flashcard. More on that in a video further down the line. But yeah, here's me and Prerag discussing how to improve your flashcards by adding extra information. I wonder if you can just kind of take us through some other sort of random cards, just so we can get an idea of what kind of extra information you put. And and while we're there, if we can talk about what makes a good flashcard versus a bad flashcard. And I know you've got videos about this that we'll put in the description section wherever people are watching this.
So here's a good one. So, you know, this is bumetanide to furosemide conversion, which is, both of these are just diuretics. But notice how the first question was just like 2 milligrams IV is how much furosemide PO. This is a very just basic question. And then the answer was 80, which is what I put in the back. But in the extra column, I included all of the contextual basis behind that, which is 40 milligrams of Lasix PO is 1 milligram of bumetanide PO. And then underneath that, I also said like 40 milligram Lasix is 20 milligrams Lasix IV. So that's the conversion from PO to IV of Lasix. And then I also included the conversion of bumetanide PO to IV, which is 1 milligram bumetanide PO is 1 milligram IV. So even though this question is testing one facet of this, which is bumetanide to Lasix, you can see how I would need to know a lot more, you know, because you need to know Lasix PO to Lasix IV, bumetanide PO to bumetanide IV. And so on the extra column, I almost always have all of the prerequisite information I need to understand this question. So when let's say I just wrote 2 milligrams is equal to 80 PO. If I had nothing else here, this is a very useless card because then I'm just like, oh, cool, 2 is 80, but 1 might be 40. And then like, what about PO to IV? Like all of those small things. And now I have this card here that actually answers all of those. So even though it's just one question that I'm being asked, I have a lot more knowledge here that I can absorb. So this one says, which one is the left gastroepiploic artery comes from? And this is just relating to the stomach. So notice how I included a picture of the stomach in my extra column. And you'll see that the left one comes off of, the left one comes off the splenic artery and the right one comes off the gastroduodenal. So notice how I included this picture and I said splenic. So I'm like, okay, here's the splenic artery. Oh, there's the left gastroepiploic. Got it. If I had asked right, then notice how I'd need to go to the celiac trunk, probably go to the gastroduodenal, and then it comes off the gastroduodenal on the right side. So again, not just the answer, but all the prerequisite information I need to understand that question.
Yeah, because I suppose for that one, like if you didn't have the image, the danger is your brain would just begin to associate that specific phrasing of the question with splenic artery, just the words, and you wouldn't have the idea, like the actual concept in your mind.
Yeah, which is really important, right? Because anatomy is so visual. So you may memorize these two things, but I would argue that having the picture makes it even easier to memorize, because you're like, oh yeah, splenic artery, and oh, it just comes off. It's on the left side. Of course. Yeah. So this adds a lot more context, and I'd argue even makes it easier, because it seems like you and I are very similar. I can't just memorize random facts. I need to have some sort of like, there's logic behind this, like whoever made these amazing things didn't just do it out of craziness. There's logic behind each and everything. And so this kind of adds a bit more reason. So this one's asking, like, what is drug-induced aseptic meningitis? Again, it's a very simple, basic question. But you'll notice how I included an abstract here. It's a picture of an abstract from JAMA that talks about drug-induced aseptic meningitis, and I have the actual paper here if I wanted to refer to it. But again, I kind of summarized it in my own way. It's when certain drugs you take can cause your CSF fluid to actually have the same breakdown as if you had viral meningitis. And so notice how I kind of even highlighted the part of the abstract that's important, which is NSAIDs can cause this, antibiotics can cause this, IVIG can cause this, and antibodies against the T3 receptor can cause this. But again, basic question, basic answer, but all the information I need to understand that answer in the context of medicine. So here's another one. So this is just Light's criteria for thoracentesis. So let's say you wanted to decide if a thoracentesis, if a pleural effusion you had was caused by heart failure as opposed to an infection. This Light criteria explains it. But notice that I don't even ask any questions about it. I ask another test that's really specific for exudative pleural effusion is cholesterol. Cholesterol values greater than what are indicative of exudative, and this is 45, right? And then also notice I included my transudative stuff here because it's not just about exudative. So transudative are usually bilateral. They're caused by heart failure, cirrhosis, nephrotic syndrome, and exudative are usually infection and malignancy. So again, everything I need to understand the concept, but then my question is a very specific facet of that knowledge bank.
I suppose at that point, if you still didn't understand it, having read the information, that's when you would just open up Google and just literally Google it, find a Wikipedia article.
Exactly. But notice how I don't just make one card. So look, this is the same thing. What are 3 causes of exudative effusions? So I usually have so many questions about one topic. I approach it from like 80 different attack angles that if I go through all of my cards and I sleep on it, those angles come together. It's kind of like the puzzle analogy we were using, which you fill in pieces of the puzzle, and before you know it, you've filled the whole puzzle in, and your concept bank is full. You just didn't know it.
All right, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about the best settings that you should use for Anki. Essentially, there's a YouTube video by this guy called Connor, aka Suppy, and he's got this guide to Anki intervals and learning steps. And I've experimented around with loads of different Anki settings, and these are the ones that I would recommend that you get started with. The default Anki settings are all right, but they can cause problems. And this half-an-hour video has like a whole long explanation of it if you really want to get into it. But because this is a beginner's class, we're not going to bother explaining stuff. We're just going to be like, right, these are the settings that you want. So how do you change your Anki settings? Well, you'll notice that next to every deck, there's a little options icon. Let's use my USMLE one and click options. Now, you'll see that we've got different option groups here, and I'm going to manage and create a new one, and I'm going to call that group, let's say, Ali recommended settings. Cool. Now, basically, these are the numbers that we want to put in. So under the new cards, essentially there's like three categories of settings, just to briefly explain. We've got new cards, reviews, and lapses. So new cards are cards that are still in the learning phase, and reviews are, how many reviews we're doing each day. But basically cards start off in the learning phase, and then once you get them right enough times, they graduate. And then in theory, they are cards that you should know. And if you get them wrong once they're graduated, at that point, they reset back to new cards, kind of. Or rather, at that point, it counts as a lapse, and then it effectively resets back to new. It's complicated. You don't really need to know the details. Basically, the new card default steps, I think, are 3 and 15, which means that when a card is new, you'll have noticed in the previous examples, if you click again, it comes up in 3 minutes. And if you click good, it comes up in 15 minutes. And then after that time, if you click good, it graduates because the graduating interval is set to 1 day. So after just getting it right twice, in a span of 15 minutes, the card counts as having graduated. And then if you ever get it wrong again, at that point, the card difficulty becomes penalized, which means that you start seeing that card over and over again. And in this video, Konana calls it ease hell. And I think that's a great description of it, because everyone who doesn't change the default Anki settings gets into this problem where they're like, I swear I've been seeing this card so often. Why does it keep on coming up? It's because you haven't changed the settings. These are the settings you want to change it to. So for new cards, you want to write 15. So the first interval is 15 minutes. 3 minutes is a bit pointless because 3 minutes, you're not really learning anything. You're just testing your short-term retention of it. The next one, so 15 space, 1440. 1440 is 1440 minutes. It's 1 day. That means the first interval is 15 minutes. The next interval is 1 day. And the third interval, 8640, which I think is six days. I think that's 6 days. So that's 15 minutes, 1 day, 6 days. And the graduating interval is also really important to change. We want to change that to 15 days. Now what this means is that the first time we see a card, if it's good, it comes up in 15 minutes. If it's good, then it comes up in a day, then it comes up in 6 days, then it comes up in 15 days. And after we've got it right, after 15 days of it being a new card, then that card graduates. And at that point, we're pretty confident that we kind of know what's on the card. And at that point, if we get it wrong, then we start penalizing ourselves, which we won't go into. It's all explained in the video. But with the default settings, you don't really get to know a card very well. You just have it in your short-term memory. And for a lot of us, we have pretty good short-term memories. I've got pretty good short-term memory. It becomes very easy to just graduate a card. Whereas you want to actually get more and more steps until a card becomes graduated. Because when Anki marks a card as graduated, Anki is saying that we expect you to have memorized this card by this point. Whereas, like, you know, there's cards that I've got tomorrow that are capital of Andorra that I really can't remember, or capital of Armenia that I can't remember. I wouldn't want that to count as graduated because I know I can't remember it. Like, I want to have recalled it 4 times with at least 15 days of a gap between them to know that I fully know the card before it becomes a graduated card. So these are one of the most important settings to do. Show new cards in the order added. I actually prefer show new cards in a random order because, as you saw in the previous examples, as we were creating capitals, it becomes easy to actually memorize the order of the cards just subconsciously. So adding new cards in a random order means that you don't see one after the other, so you can figure out what the answer is based on the order that the answer came in. So add new cards in a random order. And finally, for the easy interval, I like to have 60 days as Konana recommends. Basically, I tend not to hit easy. I was hitting it a few times in the example just to kind of get us through the cards, but I usually don't mark a card as easy because if I'm marking it as easy, then I'm really questioning why do I actually have this flashcard in the first place. Something like the capital of France is Paris would be an easy card. It would be the sort of card that I actually don't need to make. So I tend not to mark easy, but easy interval I would just put at 60 days. So these are the first settings to change. Next, when it comes to the reviews, these are the settings I would recommend. So maximum reviews per day, I would set to 9999 because basically you always want to do the highest number of reviews that Anki says you should. Because if I said maximum reviews 20 a day, like I only want to revise 20 cards a day and I've got 500 cards, then I'm never going to get through them all because I'm only doing a maximum of 20 each day. Whereas I set it to 9999 because the Anki algorithm is very good. It's very good at predicting when I'm going to forget stuff. Basically, if you set your maximum reviews per day to too low a number, you are hamstringing the algorithm. You are not letting the algorithm work because you are not up for doing enough questions. And sometimes when you're getting into the swing of things, you can just blitz through hundreds of flashcards in a given sitting. So I like to have reviews at 9999. Easy bonus is fine, interval modifier is fine, and maximum interval, 90 days is fine. That's sort of the maximum amount of time that you'll see a card coming back in, basically. And then importantly for lapses, this is important. So essentially a lapse is what happens when you've got a graduated card and you get it wrong, right? So a card that's graduated, in Anki default settings, a card that's graduated is a card that you've known for 1 day. In my book, that doesn't count as knowing something. That just means you remember it from yesterday. It doesn't count. Whereas in our new settings, as we see over here, a card that's graduated is a card that we've been able to recall 4 times with a 15-day gap between those recalls. So if at that point we get it wrong, then okay, fair play. We should start seeing that card more often. The default step is 15 minutes. I think 20 minutes is better because really 15 minutes is not too great. New interval. Now, I think that should be changed. So what that means is that basically if you get a card wrong once it's graduated, it will completely reset back to its default and you're going through your 15 minutes, 1 day, 6 days, 15 days all over again, which becomes a real annoyance, especially if you made a typo or something, or you actually knew it, but you just sort of forgot it for a moment. It's unfair on ourselves to make us then redo that card in circulation again, because A, it's not a very nice feeling, and B, it also comes at the expense of the other cards. So I think it's useful to have that at 70%, as Konana recommends. So 70%, minimum interval 2 days, and leech threshold 8 lapses, leech action tag only. It's really important that this should be tag only. Essentially, what that means is that if we get a card wrong 8 times in a row, then Anki will tag it and tell us that, mate, you've been getting this card wrong 8 times in a row. Suspend is bad because suspend means Anki will start hiding that card and never show it again. But if you've got something wrong 8 times in a row, you probably want to show it rather than hide it. So tag only is the way for that. And now I've saved this as Ali recommended settings, so I'm going to hit OK. So now when I'm doing my USMLE deck, I click options and I see that, yeah, it's on Ali's recommended settings. But for example, if I click my, I don't know, capital cities deck, options, that's currently on default. Whereas I could change it to Ali's recommended settings, or I could change it to Konana, or I could change it to Asaid, or whatever I want. And now we'll see that that should be Asaid settings. And I can change that to default again. Yeah. And if we look back on USMLE, that should still be on Ali's recommended settings. So you can sort of change up the settings depending on what deck you're doing. If, for example, I was learning Japanese or learning music theory, I would want these cards to come up much more frequently. Whereas for me, learning stuff for the USMLE, you know, I've got thousands of cards in this pre-made deck, which I'll talk about later. I don't want to review them every 3 minutes. So those are the recommended settings. But basically, if you change Anki to those settings, you won't really go wrong. So yeah, that's all good. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, welcome back. In this section 3 of the course, I'm going to be answering frequently asked questions. So in this video, we're talking about when should you use Anki? And this kind of gets split up into 2 parts, right? There is when should you create flashcards, and secondly, when should you review flashcards? And we'll tackle the second one first because it's easier. You should be reviewing the flashcards every single day, because if you can do it every day, then you're letting the algorithm work in your favor, you're allowing the system to work for you, and it means you don't really have to think about it, you just have to get your daily reviews done every day. And so when I was using Anki extensively in medical school, and all my friends have done this as well, when we were using Anki properly, we'd be doing it, for example, on the toilet, or like on the bus, or like, you know, in the car. If you're in the car, someone else is driving and you're going to placement or something, then it's quite easy to just kind of blitz through flashcards, and it doesn't even have to be antisocial, because, you know, for example, what we would do in clinical school is that someone would usually have Anki open, usually me with my friend Paul driving, and then as I was doing my flashcards, I would throw the question out to the rest of the group and everyone would kind of answer. Equally, when I was in my second year, we were memorizing drugs and pharmacology and stuff using Anki. And me and my friends Callum and Paul, we were all living together. Once or twice a week, we'd get together, we'd order a city kebab takeaway, and we would just kind of do drugs, is what we called it. Just kind of bash through some Anki flashcards. So basically, when it comes to reviewing your flashcards, you want to be doing it at every opportunity when you have those spare moments of time. And yeah, you can sit down for an hour or 2 every day and be like, right, I'm just going to bash through my Anki cards. But think about the amount of time that we all waste scrolling through Instagram. You know, these days I'm on the toilet, I'm not actively preparing for anything using Anki, and so my default thing is I scroll through Instagram. Whereas, you know, now that I'm kind of approaching the preparation for the USMLE, and I'll be using Anki extensively for that, it's nice now having that thing like a default activity that I can do when I'm on the toilet. And in fact, one thing I found helpful when I was in university is having Anki as the very first icon on the very first page of my iPhone home screen. I've now reduced the friction for me doing some Anki cards rather than doing something completely pointless like scrolling through Instagram. So that is when you should review your flashcards. What about when you should create them? Now, a friend of mine, his name's Angus, he ended up ranking like amazingly well in all the exams in medicine in Cambridge. He started off making Anki flashcards in first year of med school, but he started off making them after the lecture. Like, he would take notes in the lecture and then he would convert the notes into flashcards. That is one way of doing it. But very quickly he realized that actually he didn't need to take that intermediate step of taking the note first. He could just convert the lecture into Anki flashcards as he was going along. And then for the next like 5-6 years, and he ended up like absolutely smashing every single exam and ended up like winning some like loads of prizes at graduation and stuff, because he was saying his method was purely based on, you know, just using Anki, using active recall and using spider diagrams here and there, which we'll talk more about in a future video. The point is, he cut out the intermediate step of note taking from his like flashcard generation. And so when you start getting good at using Anki, what you can do is you can start making flashcards in the lecture itself. So for example, if there's a diagram on the screen and maybe you've got the PowerPoint on your laptop, you can just screenshot from the PowerPoint, put it into Anki. Alternatively, if you don't have slides, you could just take a photo with your phone and then chuck it into Anki. You can make flashcards on the fly during lectures. So that would be one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is the more standard way, that you, in the lecture, you actually pay attention and you kind of make notes. I quite like making notes in lectures just because it helps keep me awake. And then after the lecture, then I would kind of go through and I would really ask myself, okay, do I really need a flashcard to understand / memorize this thing? And as we've talked about before, individual factoids that might come up in the exam would be reasonable to make a flashcard about. Let's say, you know, it was which chromosome is the gene for cystic fibrosis on? I feel like, okay, well, you know, there's no real understanding involved in doing that. I know it would make sense to turn that into a flashcard. Whereas, let's say it's something like in a lecture, randomly they mentioned that, you know, type 2 diabetes affects 20% of the UK population. That's not a useful flashcard, because I know that I'm never going to be asked a question asking me what percentage of the UK population is affected by diabetes, because that's just not the sort of question that we would have got in our exams. Our exams are much more scientific. They didn't really care about these kind of stats. So I wouldn't make a flashcard about that. So yeah, those are kind of the 2 most popular places where you can make your flashcards. Number 1, during the lecture itself, instead of taking notes, or maybe alongside, Or number two, after the lecture, when you're going over your material, at that point, it becomes a lot easier to just kind of screenshot stuff, chuck it into Anki, screenshot, chuck in, type a few things, chuck it into Anki, and you become very adept at creating flashcards very quickly. So that was just a few thoughts on when you should be using Anki. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, welcome back. In this video, we're talking about when you should start making flashcards. This is an absolutely classic question that everyone asks, like, when should I start doing Anki? Basically, you want to start making flashcards, I want to say as soon as possible, with the caveat that if you are a first-year medical student or a first-year student of any kind, and you're just getting started in your subject, I probably would wait a few months before making flashcards. The reason I say that is that when you're new to something, like, when I was a first-year medical student, I had no idea what the exams were going to be like. I had no idea what the experience or anything was going to be like. And so if I'd started creating flashcards from day one, I would have over-created like an absolute torrent of flashcards, and a lot of them wouldn't have been useful because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know what I knew, and as in I was just very, very, very ignorant at the start of my first year of med school. By the time I got halfway through first year, and definitely as second year rolled around, at that point I knew the score. I knew what the exams were about. I knew what sort of questions they were asking. And so it would be much more reasonable for me to then make flashcards from day one of my second year of med school all the way through to final year. And that's what I did. Like from second year, I was like, okay, I'm going to be doing Anki from day one. And it worked absolutely amazingly. Equally in third year, where I ranked first in the year group, it just worked amazingly. Whereas in first year, most of the friends that I had who discovered Anki and started using it, they just ended up making way too many flashcards. So the advice for when you should start making your flashcards is, in general, the earlier the better. But keep in mind that when you are embarking on something new, you are going to be an absolute dumbass. You're going to be ignorant about everything. You won't know what you don't know. And therefore, diving into flashcards might be counterproductive. I would suggest waiting a few months and trying to really understand everything first before you worry about the things you have to memorize. The other problem with making flashcards too early is that you end up wasting a lot of time making flashcards for things that might be trivial facts later, like further down the line. Let's take an example from medical school. In anatomy, for example, everyone basically knows that all of the muscles in the posterior compartment of the arm are supplied by the radial nerve. That fact, you only really start to fully appreciate, and it's so deeply ingrained, a few weeks or months into med school. It's not a fact that on day one you would think, okay, yeah, I'm definitely going to remember this for the rest of my life. I haven't visited anatomy for 8 years, and I still know that fact because it's just so deeply ingrained, because it's just such a classic fact. If I was a first year medical student and making flashcards for the first time, I might waste a lot of time making flashcards for all of the different muscles in the posterior compartment of the arm and bothering to list the nerve supply for them, not realizing that actually this is a fact that they're all supplied by the radial nerve. That's a fact that I can basically take for granted. Whereas if I'd waited a few weeks or months before starting to make the flashcards, A, I'm kind of doing a bit of revision because in making the flashcards, I'm doing spaced repetition and active recall. But B, I now have more of an appreciation of what the important things are that I need to put on the flashcard. So that was a very rambly way of saying, basically, the sooner you can make the flashcards, the better, because you want to spread out the workload of making flashcards. Basically, the sooner you can start revising, the better. I've had a few emails from students being like, when should I start revising for my exams? And the answer is, mate, the best time to start revising for your exams was 2 years ago. The second best time is right now. The earlier you can start doing this stuff, the better, because then we're fully taking advantage of active recall and spaced repetition. We're fully taking advantage of the fact that, our brain is wired to remember things over a long period of time, provided we give it a long period of time to do it. So the earlier the better, but with the caveat that if you're at the very start of a new chapter of your life, maybe give it a few weeks or months until you become less ignorant about what's going on. And I say this in the nicest possible way because I was an absolute ignoramus when I was in my first year of med school. I would not have benefited from using Anki for the first few weeks or months. I would have benefited it from using it a few months into it. So another question that we've had quite a lot of on Instagram is, what should I put on a flashcard? And this is an impossible question to answer because it really depends massively on what subject you're doing, what stage of that subject you're at, what year you're in, how old you are, what your exam is doing, and what specific things you want to be trying to memorize. Basically, I think the way to think about it is that Anki is like your second brain. It's like an extension of your brain, and anything that goes into Anki will become uploaded to your brain, provided you kind of do it effectively and consistently and all that stuff. And provided you stick to the minimum information principle in general and have not too much information on each flashcard, preferably just one factoid, one examinable fact. So kind of with that mindset in mind, that dictates what you should put on a flashcard. As I said in the previous video, I wouldn't make a flashcard asking me what percentage of people in the UK have diabetes, because I know that it's an irrelevant fact. Maybe it's kind of useful to appreciate how big the number is, but it's not the sort of thing I want to memorize as a piece of information. And if I had too many of those, going through my flashcards would get really, really dull and pointless because I'd be like, oh, this is a pointless question. This is never going to come up in an exam. And partly it also depends on what's our aim of using flashcards. Are we using flashcards purely to learn, or are we using flashcards to prepare for an exam? Because everyone realizes this at some point in their lives, and the sooner we can realize this, the better. Our exams are not the arena where we test how much we've learned. Our exams are the arena where we test how well we've prepared for the exam. In an ideal world, in an absolutely perfect education system, we would learn stuff and the exams would test the learning, and the exams would be relevant to the learning, and maybe we wouldn't even have exams at all. But in the real world, we have to play the game of exams. So it really depends. What do you want to put on a flashcard? It depends on what information do you want uploaded to your brain. A few tips on this if you're still struggling. Firstly, the most important thing to do is to scope the subject. We talked about this extensively in the previous Skillshare class about how to study for exams. You should check that out. Scope the subject first. Figure out kind of the general tree of your subject and the general branches before worrying about the kind of the details on the leaves. Because Anki is very good at the details on the leaves and the leaves. It's not very good at the branches and the big tree. So scope the subject, understand the big tree, understand where stuff fits in. And then once you've done that, you can kind of break your subject down into the relevant bits. And while you're doing that, you're looking through past exam papers. If you don't have past exam papers, ask someone a year older than you what they had in their exam. You will get some kind of idea what's in the exam. There is literally zero excuse if you're sitting there thinking, oh, but my school don't give out exam papers. Like, there are so many sources of information out there. There's the internet, there's your professors, your lecturers, your teachers, students in your year, students in the year above, students 2 years above. There are thousands of sources of information where you can find out what's going to be on the exam, basically. And therefore you can kind of build your flashcard strategy around what you know is going to sort of come up on the exam. If you're a medical student, lots of medical students use Anki. I mean, the way that I would do it for clinical school is that I would be doing question banks online. There's loads of question banks available. I use Past Medicine and Past Test personally, but there's loads of ones for the USMLE. And if I got stuff wrong, I'd be looking it up in, for example, a textbook or on Wikipedia, and I'd be turning that into a flashcard because I know it's something that I got wrong. And we learn best when we are learning based on the things we got wrong. There's no real point making flashcards on the things that we get right, because then we just end up with way too many flashcards and it kind of becomes an exercise in futility. So yeah, I know that doesn't really answer the question, but so many people asked, what should I put on my flashcards? And the answer is, dude, I'm so sorry, but it just massively depends on absolutely everything. Most importantly, what are you going to be examined on? What are you trying to upload to your memory? That's kind of the main point. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, so one of the most common questions that we get is, how long should my flashcard be? And this is controversial, right? It's controversial because there is a spectrum. There are some people who are on the sort of minimum information principle spectrum, end of the spectrum, where they would be very staunch believers in that there should only be one single fact per flashcard. Like, each flashcard should only have one objective, and that should be to only put one fact into your brain. And if you have to learn 10 facts, you create 10 flashcards because that's how it works. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got people like me for certain exams who would put entire paragraphs, or for example, like, even I think some of my flashcards had like 4 paragraphs in them, where I was just kind of committing those 4 paragraphs to memory. But in that context, I was preparing for an essay exam where I wanted all those flashcards to be uploaded to my brain. And the reason I had them as paragraphs rather than just as bullet points is because I wanted the writing style of those paragraphs to also be uploaded to my brain. So it kind of depends on what you're aiming for. I would say in general, if we're asking the question, how long should a flashcard be? The answer would be the shorter, the better. In general, especially if you're a beginner at using Anki, I would stick to the minimum information principle, which is 1 fact per flashcard, because you can't really go wrong with that. It's when you start adding way too many facts to your flashcards that it becomes such a ball ache to get through that you will just stop doing it. And like they say in like the fitness world, you know, the best workout routine is the one that you follow. Like, there's no point trying to find the perfect workout routine because chances are you won't follow it. The best one is the one that you'll follow. If you start trying to sort of extend Anki too much, especially as a beginner in it, you will end up just giving up and not using it. It's like, you know, going to the gym and trying to bench 100 kilograms on your very first attempt. Like, it's just not going to happen. You're going to become demoralized and you won't be able to do it consistently. Whereas if you stick to the minimum information principle of 1 factoid per flashcard, you can't really go wrong with that. That's what I would recommend. That's the general advice. And over time, as you get better at using Anki and more experienced, you can then start modifying your flashcards to add a little bit more information to them if you have to. Because remember, as we've discussed in the previous sections, you can always modify your flashcards, and it's very easy to do, and it's something that you absolutely should be doing. So that's my take on the topic. But we're now going to include some interview footage of a discussion that I had with Prerak and Carter. Both of them use Anki very extensively to absolutely smash their exams. Carter came like 99.99th centile in the MCAT for medical school. Prerak did like really, really well in the USMLE, again for med school. It's all very medicine specific, but the tips that they're giving are applicable to pretty much any subject. So here is the discussions between me, Prerak, and Carter about this controversial issue of how much information should you have on a flashcard. I guess it is sort of a spectrum. There are some kind of one factoid per flashcard purists who will generate 80,000 closed deletions because they want to stick to that method. And then you've got people who would memorize entire essays just using a single flashcard. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that, about kind of one factoid, or whether there's some more nuance here.
Absolutely. I'm going to just take that road in the middle, which is a little bit of each, right? Because for the USMLE, for sure, one factoid works, because the USMLE tests one very specific knowledge base point, right? But for real life medicine, one factoid does not work. I'll tell you, a lot of the questions my attendings ask me would be more like this. They would never ask me like, what is one cause of an exudative effusion? They'd be like, oh, this patient has a Lights criteria that's greater than 0.6 in terms of LDH. What do you think is on your differential? At that point, I'm not going to have to be like, oh, I don't know. I never had a flashcard that specifically talked about this scenario. I'm going to be able to need to list all of the potential causes of an exudative effusion in front of an attending, right? So, and the reason why you're seeing this card in my sub-I deck is because it was for my sub-I, which is sub-I is a lot more open-ended. I'm going to be doing a lot more reasoning. I'm going to be needing to think open-ended. But if I was taking a test, then yeah, for sure, I maybe could have been like, malignancy causes what kind of pleural effusion, and the answer could have been exudative. So I think when you're doing testing, I think those small, simple, one closed deletions definitely work. But when you're in the hospital and you have to open up your blinders and you have to consider, pretty large differentials, that's when these cards do have to happen. They got to make it into your bank somehow, because you can't just know like, oh, these are the causes of exudative, but not be able to tell people what the causes are. If they ask you, tell me all the causes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. I made a video about how I used Anki to memorize entire paragraphs for essays, which I did in my third year of med school when I was studying psychology. And a few of the comments were talking about how, oh, actually, technically, this isn't the right way to use Anki because you're supposed to have one factoid per flashcard. And the way that I sort of think about it is that, yes, fine. Technically, Anki was originally designed to learn languages, and when you're learning a language, it is a pretty much one-to-one mapping between kind of the front of the flashcard and the back of the flashcard. But you can use Anki for lots of different things, and you want to actually figure out what is your goal here. Like, what are you trying to prepare for? If you're preparing for a multiple choice pharmacology exam, then okay, fine, one factoid per flashcard makes perfect sense. If you're preparing for an exam where you're going to get a random question from any of these 8 topics in psychology, and you want to memorize specific references that have descriptions of papers and stuff, it doesn't make sense to kind of do it one line at a time, because again, you're just kind of compartmentalizing your knowledge in a way that doesn't make sense. You want to kind of put it together because that's the format you'll be tested in. Within the sort of theory crafting around Anki, there's sort of like a spectrum. There are some people that fully purists of the minimum information principle, which is the idea that each flashcard should test one and only one factoid. And then there are sort of people like me that would use it for things like memorizing entire essays, and just have like a whole paragraph of stuff within a flashcard that I would then force myself to recall. I wonder where on that spectrum would you sort of slot most of your stuff?
The rule that I try and stick to is I really try and say no more than 4 things for a flashcard. So one of the cards that comes to mind that's in my developmental class is that I think I have a card asking like, what are 4 functions of Sertoli cells? And so I can tell you that they phagocytize cytoplasm, they produce inhibin, they produce androgen binding protein, and they produce like a medium to nourish the sperm. And so that's sort of where I think I draw the limit at about 4 things. Sometimes you just, I think it depends. There's sometimes where if you have like a clever mnemonic, once you start getting more than 4, that's when I start trying to bust out some mnemonics. And
yeah, absolutely.
That's where I find that really helpful. So
yeah, I think it's very reasonable to have a card that has an entire mnemonic on it, because that's really just one chunk of information. Once you know the mnemonic, right, you know the information. Like that's
yeah. And I mean, I think the biggest cards that I've gotten towards have been about like 7 things. So like especially in that pathophysiology class where they're asking you to list, say, like 7 causes of hyperkalemia. I mean, you can go all day, all day with doing something like that. So part of it is just sort of like knowing like these are probably going to be the 7 that these are probably the 7 most important, and then just making a mnemonic for those 7. Or another really good way that I found to think of it was for something like Cushing's disease. So sort of thinking about it from like top down was how I did it. So I think I had like 8 signs or symptoms of Cushing's disease.
Have you got a flashcard for that you can show us?
Okay, so yeah, we've got 6 manifestations of Cushing's. And so so you can see right here, I put it in italics in red, work your way from the top to the bottom, then from the core to the extremities. And so for me, I thought about it from, I didn't have it organized like that on the card, but like as I was reciting it in my head, I'd think, okay, like the moon face, the buffalo hump, and then the purple striae that are on the abdomen, and then start thinking about like truncal obesity, and then work my way outwards to the thin limbs, and then that sort of stuff. That was another way, either by sort of category. I think you've mentioned in the video like categorize or die or something like that. And so that's I find that if I can't come up with a mnemonic or something like that, that's another really easy way to remember a whole chunk of information instead of just trying to list 7 ways that this thing happens. Just sort of think about like, okay, well, this really breaks up into like 3 main things, and then from there, sort of talking about it that way.
Yeah, agreed. And I'd probably say that as like if we're giving kind of beginners general advice about Anki, the minimum sort of tending towards minimum information makes sense, because then you sort of get into the swing of it, and then over time you start to realize that actually, if I've got a bit more information, it actually doesn't matter on it. I can deal with that, I think. But then equally, and I think this is why Anki is so complicated, that there's so much nuance. Like if for example you took this card and you apply the minimum information principle to it, you would end up close deleting 6 of them, and then that would just be overly excessive, because each time you go through it you'd be like, oh, okay, which one am I missing here, which one am I missing here, and eventually your brain would actually pattern match the position of the thing on the list as opposed to the actual concept, and that would just be completely counterproductive.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I meant to mention back when I was talking about bolding certain terms, because that's something you got to be careful of, because I definitely realized, especially when I was like cramming for finals this last go around, I think for my molecular genetics class, we had like, I think I had like 1,200 cards or something like that. And I realized that like, as I'm just blurring through all these cards, that a lot of times I was just like recognizing the like words in front of and behind the closed deletion, and I didn't understand the concept at all. I just knew like this word, and what goes in the middle. And so that's definitely something to try to avoid.
So that was lots of us giving lots of advice on how much information you should have on a flashcard. In general, just to reiterate, the answer is as little information as possible, and then you can start getting fancy later on once you become more experienced at using Anki. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Alrighty, another really common question: should I write notes or just make flashcards? And again, this is controversial. In my opinion, there is no point in making notes at all, ever, except for a few nuances. I talk about this a lot more in my previous Skillshare class about how to study for exams. There's like a load of stuff about note taking. But basically, note taking can be useful if you're doing it in order to understand, and you can't just do it in your head. Because sometimes it is useful to write something down in order to understand it. Note-taking is also useful if you are studying for the sorts of exams where you're being tested on information, and you're having to combine lots of different information from lots of different sources. Let's say you're studying English literature and you've got an essay question in your exam that asks you to reference 3 different sources, and you've read 500 books that year. You physically can't just return to the source material and memorize all the books. You have to make notes on the stuff that you're studying in order to synthesize and kind of condense them into a format that makes sense, which you can then put into Anki to then upload to your brain. But note taking becomes kind of the first step for that. But for example, let's say you're a medical student. I don't think medical students should be taking notes at all, because what's the point? Like, it's not like medicine is particularly challenging. It's only challenging because there's just a fire hose of information that you have to learn. It's not like we're getting these like arcane sources and we're putting information together in a novel way and trying to reach some kind of fundamental insight. No, we're not doing that. We are preparing for standardized exams. Every medical student in the world basically learns exactly the same syllabus. And so there are thousands of revision sources out there that, give the information to you. Making notes as a medical student, in my opinion, and the opinion of most of my friends, is a total waste of time. It should not be done unless it's required and unless you need to do it to understand your content. And so as a medical student, I would go for flashcards rather than notes, because in a way, your flashcards do become your notes. Like if you're using the closed deletion or if you're using basic flashcards, as you're adding to your flashcards and hopefully you're making your flashcards bigger, you're testing yourself on only one concept, but you're adding lots of information to the extra information bit of the flashcard. So in a way, your flashcards kind of become your own notes. And lots of my friends who used Anki quite well, if they came across a new condition or something, they wouldn't search through like Evernote or OneNote or anything. They would just search through the Anki database because they knew that that information would be in there somewhere, and then they would just add that piece of information to the flashcard. And in a way, Anki then becomes sort of a note-taking system. Yeah, note-taking can be useful if you've got a subject that requires you to make all these inferences, to use all these different sources. Medicine is not one of them. If you're a medical student, I think you're wasting your time by taking notes. I think you can just go for flashcards and you can just go for mind maps. And we're going to include a segment from Carter here, the guy who did really well on the MCAT, about this whole idea of notes versus flashcards, and I hope he kind of backs up what I'm saying. A couple of things that just came to mind. How much do you take your own notes relative to just using Anki?
Are you talking about like when I'm in lecture or like that sort of thing?
Yeah, when you're in class, and so the way I think of note taking is like note taking in class, which for me personally is just to keep me awake, and then there's note taking after class, which is to sort of flesh out and try and understand stuff a bit more.
Right. Yeah, so I take notes in class just because it's one of those things that just keeps me awake and keeps me engaged with material. Yeah. For my emergent diseases class, I don't take any notes whatsoever. What he does is he just uploads the PowerPoints with blanks in them. And so I'll just pay attention just enough to fill in those blanks. And he doesn't ask, I mean, he's very old school, so he doesn't ask anything that's not directly on the PowerPoint. So, and his PowerPoints are very fleshed out. So it's not like you have to like understand, there's not like a whole lot of in-depth understanding you need to have behind it. So I find that that's actually a time that I can get other stuff done. So I can sort of just be multitasking where I'm just filling in the blanks, but then working on other stuff like sending emails and that sort of stuff. But during a class like developmental biology or my bioinformatics class, it's definitely important for me, I feel like, because a lot of those professors will say like, all right, here's a PowerPoint, and then I'm going to talk about some stuff that I will test on that's not already on this PowerPoint. So in that case, I'll take notes or I'll flesh out a diagram so that I understand that diagram that we walked through better. But I mean, after class, that's where my note taking ends. Is after class, I find that like the rate limiting step in my learning is putting things into Anki, and that once it's in Anki, I mean, there's not a whole lot of purpose for me taking notes. The only time that I'll bust back open the iPad and sort of like take notes again is if there's a concept that I'm just very confused about and I'm having a hard time differentiating between two things. So then I might make like a list to compare and contrast the two. But especially when I was studying for the MCAT, what I've told a lot of people is like, I did not take a single note while studying for the MCAT. And a lot of people don't believe me. And, I've tried to tell, because I scored very, very well on it. And, so people ask me like, hey, how did you get that score? And, what I keep telling people is like, listen, I didn't take a note. All I did was Anki and practice questions. That is all I did. And, there's people who, I see them like highlighting their book and like taking all these like pages of notes. I'm like, listen, like I told you what I did. And so with that, all I did was they had these like review books for each subject, and I just read the review book. And instead of taking notes on that book, all I did was just anything I want to like note and remember, I just put into Anki. And I knew that if I put it into Anki and just kept up with my reviews, I was gonna see it often enough that if they tested me on it, I would probably be able to answer it pretty well.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's my theory of note taking as well. I think especially for medicine and for subjects where it's not like you're going through sort of 18,000 English literature texts and having to create novel insights. In those circumstances, fair enough, you need to take notes to summarize the material because it's physically impossible. Right. But when it comes to, the MCAT or the USMLE or medical school exams, where it's basically finite, discrete chunks of information that you're being tested on, and that everyone in the world is basically learning the same stuff. Taking notes, yeah, I agree. It's sometimes helpful for understanding if there's a particularly tricky concept, but beyond that, if it's an Anki. And actually, there was a guy in my year at Cambridge who ranked second in the entire year group, just like absolutely smashing all the exams. And he also had a social life. He was Anki from day one. His note taking was getting screenshots from the lectures there and then and just chucking it into Anki. And in the lectures, he'd be making Anki flashcards as we were going along. Whereas all of the rest of us in first year, we were just like making our notes and doing our highlighting. And he ended up absolutely destroying every single exam just by using Anki.
Yeah, I have a friend who's in PA school right now. So like, do y'all have those over there?
Sort of
like
not,
physician assistant, sort of like a mid-level provider. So he's in school right now, and I mean so he has mandatory class attendance. So what I mean, he'll go to class, but I mean he is just sitting there in class and he's just taking the PowerPoint and just putting it. He's doing what you just described, putting it into Anki, and he just goes ahead and just starts making cards right there.
All right, welcome back. In this video, we are tackling the question of how do you avoid flashcard overload? And this is something that we are all going to experience when we start using Anki. Sometimes, you know, even with the best of intentions, you just find that you've made a lot of cards and the cards just start to pile up. Like maybe there's one day where you miss your reviews and suddenly you've got 400 cards to do the next day, and then you think, oh shit, 400 cards, I can't be asked for this. And then you skip your review and then you've got 600 and now you're being overloaded by flashcards. There's a few kind of tips that we can use to get around this. Firstly, and most importantly, if you can consistently do your flashcards every single day, then you will not be overloaded by flashcard. That's just the first thing to say. Secondly, you want to avoid making flashcards on the stuff that you know you already know, especially at the start, especially if you're not following my advice and kind of making flashcards from day one of med school. You're going to make loads of flashcards on things just because you like the idea of making a flashcard and it feels like a safety blanket and you think, oh, I couldn't possibly know this without a flashcard. But when it comes to flashcards, we don't want to be creating that many, because the more flashcards we create, let's say we create 100 flashcards every lecture and we've got 100 lectures. That is way too many flashcards to handle. Instead, we should probably create maybe 10 to 15 flashcards per lecture, even if it's a lecture that's 1 hour long, because the rest of the information probably doesn't need a flashcard. It doesn't require us to memorize it. It probably requires us to understand it. And as we've talked about, Anki is not great for understanding. Anki is wonderful for memorization. So yeah, number one, do it consistently. Number two, avoid making too many flashcards. Thirdly, even with the best of intentions and the best strategy, the flashcards can pile up, especially towards the exams when you've gotten through all your syllabus and you've got a few hundred flashcards to review each day. One way to avoid overload on that front is just kind of split up the studying session. So what I would do is I would do a little bit in the morning, then a bit in the afternoon, then a bit in the evening, then a bit before bed while I'm lying in bed with a dark mode on Anki using an add-on that kind of makes me swipe through flashcards, and I just make sure I get all of them done by staggering them throughout the day. So that would be one other way of doing it. And now we've got a segment from Carter, who did very well in the MCAT using Anki, about the load balancer add-on. That's kind of another tool in your arsenal for combating flashcard overload. So I will hand over to David now. Any tips in general on how to kind of maintain the motivation? Because like often I would find, and I certainly know friends who would, we'd log onto Anki and we'd be like, oh my God, 648 flashcards to do today. And then it would just seem so overwhelming that we would just end up not doing it. How do you kind of get over that?
Yeah, so there's two ways to go about that. I can tell you the one that I do, and then there's one that's also very popular. So basically what I would do is any block of medical school that I was in, I would make sure I did those reviews. They just needed to be done for, my upcoming exams. We had weekly exams. But then in order to, prepare the best I could for my board exam, it was important for me to review old material too. So I had another deck of reviews. In order to not get overwhelmed, I would usually limit the reviews on that deck to maybe like 100 cards or so. So that would take me, I was using Pomodoro techniques for studying. That would take me about 25 minutes to get through. That just kind of let me know that every day I would have about one Pomodoro technique of review cards, and that helped me from getting like overwhelmed. If, I had less to do that day, I could add more to that review pile, but I just kind of knew like approximately 25 minutes I would be spending reviewing. So I didn't wake up and have like, 2,000 cards to review. And I'm like, wow, I'm not going to do anything today except flashcards. Because to me, that was not motivational. That was, a lot of people, you get overwhelmed with that. So that's how I did. I set my review limit. Some people would argue that that makes Anki less effective. That could be argued. But to me, it was like flashcards are used for a certain purpose, and that's for like memory retention. But I had to spend some time using other resources to like understand things. Like you're probably not going to be able to understand physiology from Anki. You need to learn that from your other resources that are provided. You use Anki to kind of retain things in your memory going forward.
Oh, that's how I did it. That's very interesting. So let's talk about the second thing, and then we'll come back to this understand versus remember thing, because I think that's really important. Yeah. So what was the second thing that you were saying that you didn't do, but some people do in order to not get overwhelmed by flashcard overload?
Yeah, so a new thing that came out, at some point when I was in medical school is another add-on. Basically, there's people who know how to code and they keep making these improvements for Anki. It's open source, so it's very useful, but it's called a load balancer add-on. So the load balancer add-on basically will look at how many reviews you have in the upcoming days, and it will kind of spread it out for you. So instead of one day you waking up, you open up your Flashcard app and you're like, oh my gosh, I have 800 reviews. This is going to take hours. That load balancer add-on will look at the next few days and basically make it so it's equal. So instead of having 800 one day and 200 the next day, it'll spread it out for you. So you have 500 one day, 500 the next day. And it does that over a week period. So you can imagine it makes it so it's a little bit more consistent. You can kind of expect approximately how many reviews you're going to have each day. So it's not a complete guess or a complete surprise when you open it up.
Okay. But it sounds like you went for the method of kind of hard limit, only 100 reviews per day so that it becomes manageable. And I suppose...
I did, mostly because I didn't find out until the load balancer until pretty late. And I just liked, like I said, I knew 100 cards took me one Pomodoro technique to get through. So I was I felt comfortable with that in my preparation, that was a good enough review for me that day. And if I had more time, I could add on if I wanted to.
So those were some tips on how to manage flashcard overload. Just to reiterate, number one, most importantly, just do them consistently. It's really hard to do, but if we can do it, we're sorted forever. Number two, avoid making too many flashcards. Number three, you can split up your study session if you want. And number four, you might want to consider the load balancer add-on. All right, in this video, we're tackling the question of how do you stay consistent at doing your flashcards? And we've talked so many times about how Anki is the most powerful learning tool ever invented, but it's only the most powerful learning tool ever invented if you use it every single day and you can do it consistently. But that's a challenge for a lot of us. Consistency is a huge challenge. How do you pluck up the motivation to sit down and do the flashcards? There's all sorts of ways of tackling this. I've got another Skillshare class about kind of tips for productivity, and that talks about some general principles, some powers, some laws, things we can, mental models we can have in our heads for trying to be more consistent at doing stuff. Really, I guess what it comes down to when it comes to being consistent with Anki cards is that at the start, you have to force yourself to do it. It's like if you want to run a marathon, at the start, and you're training for a marathon, at the start, you won't want to get out of the house and go running, but you kind of have to force yourself to do it because you know that actually this is in service of a wider goal. And so when you're starting out with Anki, you have to force yourself to do it. But then the nice thing is that once you've forced yourself to do it for a few days, and you start getting into this positive feedback loop of, oh, I actually know this, and you start realizing that your mind is expanding and you're memorizing more stuff, it feels really good. And the point we want to get to is the point where doing Anki becomes quite fun. It becomes like a game where you think, all right, cool. It feels like a personal challenge. All right, let's do this. Come on, lads, let's bash through some Anki flashcards. And that comes after a few weeks, I'll be honest, a few weeks of doing Anki, forcing yourself to do Anki every day. If you can get to it sooner, then fantastic, you're really winning at life because you are enjoying the things that we're doing rather than just forcing ourselves to do it. But at the start, we do have to force ourselves. A few other ideas. So for example, one thing you can do is there's an idea called habit stacking where, doing flashcards every day, we want it to become a habit. But to make it become a habit, what we can sometimes do is we can tie it to something else that we're already doing. So for example, one place where I do a lot of flashcards is on the toilet. So if I'm sitting down to do a poo, I'll get my phone out and I will do Anki. Doing a poo is the habit. I've just tied in my head the idea that when I'm doing a poo on the loo, I'm going to be doing flashcards as I go along. Another tip is that you can incorporate the idea of the 5-minute rule, which is when you're struggling to pluck up the motivation or discipline or willpower to sit down and do your flashcards, you can tell yourself, right, I'm just going to do this for 5 minutes. And everyone can do 5 minutes. We all have an extra 5 minutes in our day to do some flashcards. And usually for me, I've tricked my brain into getting started. Now that I'm started, I actually quite enjoy doing the flashcards. And so I ended up doing it for a lot longer and end up finishing my reviews. Another way to be more consistent at using Anki is to do it with friends. I've used lots of flashcards with friends. As a medical student, we're all learning the same stuff. And it's quite nice having a group study session and everyone kind of working through flashcards together. So that's another way to be consistent. A fourth way is the Heatmap add-on, which we'll talk more about in the later section of the course. And finally, I want to leave you with Prerak and I discussing the idea of how we build a consistent schedule around doing flashcards. So you said that you do 2 hours of Anki every day. How do you bring yourself to do that? Because I know a lot of people, as I'm sure you do, who download Anki, they get the Anki deck or some random deck and they see, oh shit, 8,000 cards to do today. Then even if you start off with really good intentions, as everyone does, you end up kind of missing a day or two and then the reviews start to pile up. How do you bring yourself to consistently do it as you've been doing?
That's one of the silver linings and also pitfalls of Anki. So the good part is you do have to do those if you want to use Anki well. And the bad part is there's no way to get around it. So you really do have to make yourself do it, or else those cards will start to pile up. And at that point, it's useless. That deck becomes useless because you have too many cards and you'll get too far behind. So it almost had to become algorithmic for me. Like, I have to do these cards, or of course there will be people who want to take days off, and I'm definitely one of those people. Get better at knowing, okay, today I'll take my day off, but tomorrow I'll have to put in twice as much work. Or, I'll take 3 days off, and on the weekend I'll spend 8 hours just catching up. Those were all things I would do, even based on medical school and just the timing we had. But you still have to get into the mindset of, like, I still have to do these cards. Just because I have a lot of them should not deter me from finishing my deck.
So those were just some tips on how we can be more consistent at using flashcards. Genuinely, this is a real struggle. Everyone struggles with it. If you're struggling with being consistent in your flashcards, you're not alone. I still struggle. I still have to, do my flashcards every day, and I struggle to do it every day. But that's kind of where we want to be getting to. And actually, the more consistently we can be doing our flashcards, the easier our lives are just going to be. So it's just such a no-brainer. But I think you do have to kind of force yourself to do it in the first instance. All right, a few app-specific questions now, and in this video we're talking about Anki versus Quizlet. Basically, Quizlet is pretty good. Quizlet is pretty, it looks nice, it's got nice animations, it's more of a pleasure to use than Anki is. And I think Quizlet is fine for doing things like learning the capitals or, learning simple stuff. But if you're, for example, embarking on a long-ass quest, like of medical school, for example, or you're doing a university degree, I would suggest that Anki is probably better. And the reason Anki is better is A, it's more powerful. Like, you can do a lot more things on Anki. You've got add-ons for everything. There's so many customizations. And the act of inputting stuff into Anki is a lot quicker. Like, you can use keyboard shortcuts effectively. It's not a web-based interface. It's like a genuinely desktop app that lives on your desktop, so it's a bit quicker. There's sort of these minor efficiencies in using Anki rather than Quizlet really add up over a long period of time. And the fact that you can customize it with add-ons and you can kind of add images and stuff easily, the more easily we can do stuff on any kind of app, the more likely we are to use it. And especially when it's something like Anki or a flashcard app that we're going to be using for hundreds of hours throughout our university experience. I'm assuming you're a university student here, but this applies to school as well. Especially if it's something like that, the more seconds we can shave off every interaction with the app, the more time we save in the long run. And so that, in my book, is the biggest reason for using Anki over Quizlet, because it's just quicker, it's more efficient, it's more customizable, it's just generally more powerful. And yeah, if you like using Quizlet and you want to pay for Quizlet Premium with 20 quid a year for the spaced repetition, then sure, go for it. It doesn't really matter what you use. It's all basically the same stuff, provided you're using active recall and spaced repetition. But having tried both of them, my personal recommendation would be to use Anki rather than Quizlet. So hopefully that answers the question. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, let's now talk about Anki versus Google Sheets. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then feel free to skip this video. But basically, a few years ago, I made a video on YouTube where I was talking about how I use Google Sheets as a flashcard alternative, as an alternative to Anki. And the idea for that method is that you have the questions in column A and answers in column B. And then you hide the answer, as in you make it white, make the text white so that you've hidden the answer. And then you can just kind of go through. Now, the Google Sheets method is a good way of cramming for an exam. And I would only really use the Google Sheets method when cramming, because it's essentially a ghetto version of Anki. It's like a hacked version of Anki that gives you the question and answer, kind of like the Cornell note-taking method, which I talked about more in previous Skillshare class, kind of like the Cornell note-taking method. But it doesn't have the spaced repetition algorithm. It doesn't have a facility to mark how difficult you found a question. I suppose what you could do is you could select the cells and highlight them in red and yellow and green, as I used to do. But my philosophy about this is Google Sheets is good for cramming. Anki is good for the long term. So if you have more than, let's say, 2 months until your exam, I wouldn't use Google Sheets, because Google Sheets is effective for cramming, for really thinking, okay, what are the main important questions I need to know here? And just kind of going over them over and over again. Whereas Anki, it basically does the same thing as Google Sheets, but just with a more robust spaced repetition algorithm. So Google Sheets for the short term if you're going to cram for an exam, but definitely Anki if I've got more than 2 months to prepare for the exam that I'm preparing for. All right, another quick one. This is a very common question. Do I use Anki or do I use Notion? Now again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, skip this video, it's not relevant. But the reason people are asking this is because for the last few months, 2019, 2020, I've been talking about how I use Notion to take notes in med school. Well, I'm not in med school anymore, but I teach medical students. And so I use Notion to take notes for my stuff. And this is an example of, for example, my gastrointestinal physiology kind of sheet. And essentially I use these toggle features. So this is sort of the structure of the lecture, structure of the gut, blood supply, blah, blah, blah. And then, where are we? So instead of just writing notes, I write notes or copy and paste stuff from the lecture, but I hide them within these toggles. And these toggles are usually questions. So how much blood flow per minute? 1200 mils per minute through the splanchnic bed. What is functional hyperemia in this context? Blah, blah, blah. Blood flow supplied to the villi. So in a way, this is sort of a flashcard, but it's sort of a flashcard in the sense that you've got some information in that essentially you're asking yourself a question and then you're trying to answer it. But again, the short answer to this question is that it's not really a dichotomy. It's not like Notion or Anki. If I could only choose one, I would use Anki all the time. But Notion is good for helping understand the bigger picture. The problem with Anki is that it's good at kind of helping you memorize the individual pixels. But sometimes if you are just using Anki and just memorizing the individual pixels, you won't really get a deep understanding of the subject. You'll just see loads of pixels and you won't really appreciate the bigger picture. So one thing I've started thinking a lot recently is that with Anki, if you want to use it properly, you need some kind of system on the side that helps you to understand the bigger picture. One way of doing that is by making spider diagrams or mind maps. This is where you have your topic in the middle, kind of like your tree, and then you have your branches, and then you can use Anki to learn the details on the leaves, if that kind of metaphor makes sense. The alternative to mind maps and spider diagrams is to use Notion. So this is basically what I would create into a spider diagram. So I would have general gut physiology in the middle, and then I'd have structure of the gut, blood supply, epithelial lining, blah, 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 peristalsis, whatever. This is basically a mind map that I've created for myself, but it's just that while going through the lecture, I thought, you know what, I might as well just make some questions about it. It's also kind of different for me because I don't need to memorize this stuff. I'm not preparing for an exam right now, apart from the USMLE, which is a slightly different way of preparing for it. I'll be using Anki for that fully. I more have these notes because I'm teaching the subject to my medical students. And therefore, it's completely reasonable for me to have my laptop open with the notes in front of me while I'm talking about GI physiology to them. Like, I don't have to have this information off the top of my head. And so if you're a student preparing for an exam, I would suggest that you don't need to do this kind of stuff. If you're taking notes, then you might as well add a question to them just so it becomes the Cornell note-taking method and it becomes legit because you're using active recall. But if you're not taking notes, just put stuff straight into Anki. It's not a case of Notion versus Anki, but having said that, if I could only choose one, I would use Anki. And again, yeah, you can basically create a Google Sheets kind of flashcard method on Notion. But again, that would be fine if you're cramming for an exam, but it wouldn't be fine if you're doing it over the long term. Again, Anki does the same thing, but you might as well let the Anki spaced repetition algorithm work in your favor. That's the thing that Google Sheets and Notion don't have. They don't have a spaced repetition algorithm built in because that's not the objective of the software. Whereas Anki is specifically designed to upload information to our brains. And so if you're in the business of uploading information to your brain as a student, then you want to be using Anki. Notion is sort of the note-taking layer on top of that helps you understand the subject, that helps you understand the bigger picture. So actually I would just probably use both if you can. All right, so the final video in this frequently asked questions kind of segment of the class isn't really a question, it's more reiterating the importance of playing the long game when it comes to Anki. And in fact, it's just generally important to play the long game, i.e. to try and be as consistent as possible when we're doing anything in life. Like, you know, there's almost nothing that benefits from short, you know, intensive bursts rather than kind of playing the long game over time. Health is long game, exercise is long game, relationships are a long game. You know, basically anything worthwhile in life benefits from compound returns over time by playing the long game. And studying for our exams is no different. If we play the long game, if we can be consistent on a daily basis, then we're letting Anki work in our favor. We're letting the maths speak for itself and we're letting the algorithm upload stuff to our brain, and it just works absolutely perfectly. The other thing is that I think it's really important, like especially if you've gotten this far in the class, you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed because there's like a load of information. We could have split this up into 2 or 3 classes, but decided against it in the end just because I think it's nice just being like, this is everything you need to know about Anki. But it is kind of a time investment to learn. Like, it's not one of those things where you'll start using it on day one and immediately pick it up and immediately start sort of breezing around with it. It's just not like that. It's sort of like playing a piano. Like, it feels like hard work initially, but if you put that hard work in, then you get the absolute joy of being able to play the piano. So it's kind of the same with Anki. So if you're feeling overwhelmed at any point, really think of it as an investment in your future, an investment in getting better grades and reducing your stress and just having generally more fun with doing the things that we have to do to study and to pass our exams. So just a quick message, public service announcement about the importance of playing the long game. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next section of the class. All right, welcome back to the class. Bit of a change of scenery now. We are now on section 4, which is all about optimizing Anki. And we're going to be talking about add-ons, and we're going to be talking about how to use pre-made decks effectively. Before we launch into this section, I just want to give a word of warning. This is some kind of advanced stuff. If you're an Anki beginner, I would suggest actually that you don't watch the rest of this course for now, because it can get very overwhelming very quickly, because this is now like complicated stuff. In fact, even the last section was a little bit on the complicated side. If you're a beginner at Anki, the single best thing that you can do right now is to turn off this class, even though it means I'm getting less revenue because it's paid per watch time. But the best thing you can do for yourself is to turn off this class right now and spend a few weeks trying to do Anki every day. And as you're doing it, you'll figure out that like some like optimizations that you can make yourself. You'll work out what the things that you find difficult are, so that when you come back to this class and we talk about add-ons and optimizations and hierarchical tags and pre-made decks and all these kind of fancy things, you'll have more of a baseline, like a foundational baseline for how to kind of understand that stuff. Having said that, I know when I watch online classes, I like watching all of them in one go, and I tend not to do the exercises that the people recommend. So if you're still with us, then that's absolutely fine. In this section, we're going to be talking about tags, organizing tags, using pre-made decks properly, and a few different add-ons that me and others would recommend. So let's dive into it. All right, welcome back. Let's talk about tags. Now, when you make a flashcard, you might have noticed that you've got the option of adding a tag to it. So for example, let's make a new capital. So add, I don't know, let's say front is Pakistan and back is Karachi. Fair enough. In fact, let's change that to a close, just so we do this properly. So we say the capital of Pakistan is Karachi. And I can close that one and I can close that too. Perfect. Pretty basic stuff that we covered in section 1 of the class. If you don't know what I did there, then you are way too far in this course. You need to go back and look at close deletions that we talked about in chapter 1. And let's grab some extra information from the internet. So Karachi, let's get a random image from the Google. I don't know, let's pick this copy image, chuck it in here for now, that'll do. Now you'll see that when I'm creating this flashcard, I've got the option to add a tag. Now I'm gonna add the tag Asia, okay? And we've added a thing. Let's now pick another. So let's go, capital of India is New Delhi. Close that, close that. Can't be bothered to add extra information for now, but you'll see the tag stays as being Asia. If I want, I can delete that and change it, but I'm gonna keep it as Asia. And let's do another one. The capital of, I think that's how you spell it. Don't know, doesn't matter. But it's now got the Asia tag. Now, if we look at the browse thingy, this might look a bit intimidating, but don't let it. Basically, at the top of our browse, we've got a whole collection, and then we've got the list of decks and list of subdecks. If you have subdecks within your decks, more about that later on in this section. And actually, underneath the decks, we have a list of all these card types. So these are all like basic card types. This is the closed deletion card type. So if we wanted to, we could have a look and see all of our different closed deletions, all of our different basic cards. Your list is probably less big than mine because I've got a few pre-made decks. Again, more on that in a little bit. But then underneath that, we have all of these tags. And you'll see this little tag icon that shows that it's a tag. Now, again, my list is absolutely huge because I've got lots of pre-made decks, and pre-made decks tend to use a lot of tags in them. But let's find our Asia tag, and we'll see when we click on our Asia tag, it filters all of the cards that have the tag Asia. Okay, so fair enough. They've got the tag of Asia. Why is this helpful? Well, it's helpful because if we have an appropriate tagging system, firstly, it helps in terms of organizing our deck. And secondly, it helps in terms of creating custom sessions. So in terms of organizing the deck, let's say I was, it kind of makes a bit more sense in medicine. Let's say I wanted to do infectious diseases, right? And I didn't have a specific deck for infectious diseases. I had a single deck that had all my stuff, all my medicine stuff in it. I could click on the infectious diseases tag or in the infectious tag, and it would find me the relevant cards that are tagged with infectious diseases. So one way of actually splitting up a deck is by having everything in one big deck and then using tags to organize it within that. There's another example here. There's the MRCP and there's the MRCP2. So MRCP is the membership of the Royal College of Physicians, and MRCP2 is the part 2 of that exam. And in pre-made decks, people have tagged these different things. So if I want to, I can kind of search through that. So you kind of get the idea of tags. It works similarly to in every note-taking program you've ever used. You can just search for things by tags. But the reason why this is actually reasonably helpful is because you can create a custom study session. So if we go on decks, and then let's go capital cities, for example, just to keep things very, very basic. Now I can click the custom study button at the bottom, or shortcut C. Now when I've got this up, I can say study by card state or tag. I could select 100 cards from the deck, and I could say in a random, all review cards in a random order. And then I can click choose tags, and now it tells me which tags are within this deck. So we know Asia, require one or more of these tags, Asia. So I'm telling Anki that I only want to study the stuff that's tagged with Asia. Hit OK. Now this has created a custom study session, which means I can cram the capitals of these Asian countries if I want. So the capital of India is New Delhi, the capital of Saudi Arabia is Riyadh, the capital of Pakistan is Karachi, blah, blah, blah. You know, you kind of get the idea. This is helpful because if you've got, for example, a midterm exam coming up on nephrology, the study of the kidneys, and you have, as you've been going through, you've been tagging all your kidney-related flashcards with nephrology or renal or kidneys or whatever, it means you can then cram them all in one go using a custom study session. That tends to be the main use case for those. So tags are in this section because they're absolutely not required. They're not a big deal. And actually, it's very easy to become too cute about tagging everything. Be like, oh, I'll only make a flashcard if I can add 8 tags to it. But all that does is it increases the friction to creating flashcards. And as I said right at the start of the class, we want to be reducing the friction as much as possible because friction is the worst force on the planet. And so really, I probably wouldn't use tags if I were you, if you're just getting started out. But if you've got a reasonably solid use case for them, at that point, it might be worth doing. So that was the basics of tags. In the next video, we're going to be talking about the hierarchical tags add-on that makes tags a little bit more useful. All right, welcome back. In this video, we're talking about the hierarchical tags add-on. And instead of me explaining it, which gets a bit boring and a bit dull, we have got David, who did very well in the MCAT, who uses the hierarchical tags add-on pretty extensively. And he is explaining and walking us through how we use it and why it's useful. So I'm going to hand you over to David.
The hierarchical tags is some of the decks are basically, they're altered in different ways. So I can show you. So like this deck right here with a plus sign has a bunch of what are called sub decks. So that's one way, whoever made this deck, that's how they decided to do it. They put a bunch of sub decks in this one deck. But this person, you can see they have all 9,000 of their cards under one name. So the only way to basically sort out those cards is to look at the tags. So right here, so like the AK step 2, this is where all of theirs is sorted out. And so basically that add-on just makes this look a little bit prettier on this side. It's a little bit more of an advanced add-on, but definitely something that you see how it's just like in a different area where the tagging system is.
Yeah, because I guess otherwise by default, you just see this long ass list of tags, which is not overly helpful.
Exactly. Otherwise, if I didn't have this for like, so this is basically decks that don't have it, it would just be like this. It would just be like this super long, it's kind of unorganized. It's kind of a headache. It's not as clean. So these are some of like the older decks that I have that don't have this tagging system, but you can see that's not near as clean as something like this, where it's broken up into the different rotations, family medicine, internal medicine, neuro, OB. And so I can kind of go through on which rotation I'm on and essentially pull out cards for that rotation. And it's just much cleaner.
So that was a look at how we can use the hierarchical tags add-on to make our tagging a little bit more effective. But again, tags are probably not very useful. I personally don't use tags very much because when it comes to medicine stuff, there's so much content that you could just have separate decks. And I don't see a real need to tag them myself. But there are people that use tags an absolute ton. But basically, you don't really need to worry about it too much because tags are not overly helpful anyway, at least for me. All right, welcome back. In this video, we're talking about the power of pre-made decks. Now, the first thing to say is a word of caution. Pre-made decks are a very powerful device, but when used inappropriately, they can cause a massive degree of overwhelm, and downloading pre-made decks is often a big reason as to why people start using Anki and then abandon it, because they just get completely frazzled and overwhelmed by the amount of cards you can sometimes get in pre-made decks. Basically, a pre-made deck is an Anki deck that someone else has already made for you that you can just download, and then you can do the flashcards. So clearly the benefit is that it saves you from having to make your own flashcards. There are some pre-made decks, like this USMLE RX one. Let's have a quick browse. I think this has, is there a way of seeing how many cards in it? Okay, well, I'm gonna scroll and you can see that there's just like an absolutely massive amount of cards in this deck. In fact, yeah, we've got basically all aspects of medicine is covered in this USMLE RX deck. I think there are over 10,000 cards in it. And you can see why if you download 10,000 cards the first time you use Anki and start trying to go through them, it becomes very overwhelming very quickly. So we'll start by just quickly talking about how to actually download a pre-made deck. And basically you can search on Google Anki pre-made decks. You will find these shared decks on Anki Web. So you can download some from there. So let's search for anatomy, for example. and it's going to give me a long list of decks that are tagged with anatomy. So this is one way of finding a pre-made deck. You can look through the Anki directory itself. It's probably not what I'd recommend. Instead, what I'd recommend is that you find some kind of online forum, like Reddit, for example, for your specific subject. For example, if you're a medical student taking the USMLE, there is a USMLE Step 1 subreddit that has loads of links to really in-depth comprehensive Anki decks, and they're filtered so that, you know, there are some decks that everyone uses and some decks that no one uses, and so you want to pick the ones that everyone uses because they're going to be higher quality, the flashcards are going to be more legit, they're going to be more fact-checked by a large group of people. So what I would suggest is whatever subject you're doing, try and find an online kind of community. Reddit is a good place to start, where you can download these pre-made decks from. And this is like super, super popular in medicine. Like loads of people in the US preparing for the USMLE for medical school use pre-made decks. And there's all sorts of debates raging on the internet as to, is Hoopla better than Zanki, which is better than Anking's deck, which is better than that person's deck? And you know, there's all these different people who make these different decks, but there's only like a handful of them to choose from. And I've gone for USMLE RX. I don't even know who made it, but I went on Reddit and found a pre-made deck. So you download a pre-made deck, and then when you download a deck, basically, let's download a random one. We click the download button, and it's going to download a file with the extension AKPKG or something like that. Oh, this is a really big file. Let's download a smaller one. Guitar note names. Only 47 notes. That should be more doable. So if I look at my downloads folder, we've got this file, guitarnotenames.apkg. Now if I double click that, here we go. It's going to automatically add it to my Anki. And now if we go on decks, we will see guitar note names with audio fretboard anatomy. So I can click on that. I can click study. First string E lower. Oh, it's got a sound as well. Don't know if you can hear that. So I guess this is good for like ear training and stuff for musicians. Anyway, that is how you download a shared deck. It's super easy. You just download the APKG file and then you double click it and then it automatically adds to your Anki. And then if I hit the synchronize button, this deck is going to be synced across all my devices magically for free with Anki Web. Isn't Anki an absolute miracle of engineering? So that is how you install a pre-made deck. In the next video, we're going to be hearing from Prerak and his advice about using pre-made decks and kind of the general philosophy of using pre-made decks. And we'll have a little bit of a discussion. And then we'll end by talking about kind of pros and cons. All right, welcome back. In this video, we're talking about the philosophy of using pre-made decks. And I'm going to start by including the discussion that Prerak and I had about the philosophy of pre-made decks, and then I will do a bit more chat at the end. So this is me and Prerak coming up now. What's your philosophy on pre-made decks versus building your own cards?
Oh, this is a good one. I think, so there's a caveat here. I think pre-made decks are phenomenal and they're going to save people a lot of time if they use them properly. But pre-made decks are really bad if you're the type of person who thinks this will solve all of my problems and just like randomly imports cards and like is like, today I'm going to learn kidney, and just looks at those cards as a way to learn kidney. That's like the worst approach, because one, you have no context behind where, how, and why those cards were made. And two, you didn't do anything to give yourself a background, right? Like, so let's say you're learning nephrotic syndromes and you just pull in all the cards about nephrotic syndromes and try to memorize them. At that point, that's like horrible, because now you're just memorizing a bunch of factoids. But let's say you watched, I don't know, a Pathoma video that explains nephrotic syndromes. Okay, you get proteinuria, you have a lot of protein loss, which leads to edema and all these things, and you actually get the framework for nephrotic syndrome. Now you pull in all the cards about nephrotic syndrome, and now suddenly you can actually shape that card based on the lens of the video you just watched. And now it'll make a lot more sense. Like, oh, okay, yeah, this is why this nephrotic syndrome presents in this way. And now I'm not just memorizing a random sentence, I'm memorizing the actual, concept of nephrotic syndromes. And so that's when pre-made decks can work, if you prequel them with some level of understanding or knowledge, or you read a chapter and then you pulled in cards that were relevant. But if you just pull in cards without reading anything, doing anything, and expect to get all your knowledge about nephrotic syndrome from a pre-made deck, you're not going to get anywhere, because then you'll just memorize a bunch of sentences. And making your own cards, I'm a big proponent of. Like, I made a lot of my cards. I have a deck about 30,000 that I use right now, and I'd say at least 20,000 of those are either my own cards or pre-made cards that I've modified with my own twist. And the reason for that is what I just mentioned to you, the memory anchor. You'll remember things a lot more when they're personable. So I usually have like inappropriate mnemonics in a lot of my cards, or like an inappropriate way to remember them, because that often is a good way to remember things. Or sometimes I'll include a picture that I found when I was learning the concept. And the reason these work a lot better is when you make a card, you do one pass of the material, right? So let's say you made a card and you like, you know, a metabolic acidosis implies a pH less than 7.4 with no changes in PSP, like with the normal PCO2. You make that card, you yourself have already gone through that first pass of saying, oh, this is what metabolic alkalosis is, and it has no change in PCO2. Now, when you do that card, you're doing a second pass automatically. When you use a pre-made card, you may have to do 1, 3, 5 passes even for you to even understand what the hell is this card saying, because you didn't really go through the process of creating that card from scratch. So you kind of have to put that context in, and that can take sometimes a lot more time than just having made your own card.
So overall, let's talk about pros and cons. So as Prerak said, the benefit of using pre-made decks is clearly that you then don't have to make your own flashcards. But there are a few huge drawbacks. Firstly, there is the massive risk of flashcard overload. If you make the mistake of not suspending basically all of the cards in a pre-made deck and then unsuspending the ones as you study the topic, you can see that list of 20,000 cards and think, I'm never going to do this, and then you just throw your laptop in the bin because you've given up on Anki. That's not what we want to do. If we're using pre-made decks, we want to be using them effectively and appropriately. Point number 2 is that, yes, it does save you time using a pre-made deck, but the research shows that it is probably a bit more effective to create your own cards. Overall, in my opinion, and in most people's opinion, the time you save from using a pre-made deck is more than made up for the fact that using a pre-made deck is slightly less efficient, is slightly less effective than creating your own cards. I would much rather have 80% effectiveness and save myself time that I don't have to make these 10,000 cards than have 100% effectiveness, but have to spend 8 years of my life actually creating these flashcards. So overall, I think the benefit of pre-made decks vastly outweighs the negative side of them, but it is important to understand the negative side. And third, it's really important to remember that if you are using a pre-made deck, you definitely want to be customizing it as you go along. If you're purely using a pre-made deck and not adding anything or editing anything, you're probably doing something wrong, and you're probably relying on memorization rather than understanding. The way that I use these pre-made decks is if there is even a single thing on a flashcard that I don't understand, that I think I'm not happy with this, I won't say to myself, I'll just memorize the fact. Unless it's something obviously that I can just purely memorize, like, you know, what chromosome is this gene on? And it's like, I don't care, like, that's pure memorization. But for most things where if I don't understand something on a card, I will look it up on Wikipedia, look it up on Google, even maybe look it up in a textbook, and then I will edit the flashcard in the extra region, or just like edit the flashcard completely to add that information to it, so that the next time I see the flashcard, I see the extra information I've added to it. So pre-made decks are amazing. They're one of the most kind of superpower features of Anki, but you do have to use them appropriately, and hopefully in this video you've gotten some advice about how to use them appropriately. All right, welcome back. So for the next few videos, we're going to be talking about different add-ons that you can add to Anki and why they're useful. So in this video, we're talking about the Heatmap add-on, which is incredibly effective, and that most people who are Anki pros, they have this add-on because it's really useful for like motivating yourself to like do Anki consistently. And I'm going to hand you over to David, who's going to be explaining exactly how the Heatmap add-on works. So you've been literally going through flashcards every day for 372 days.
Yes, that's one thing I wanted to highlight.
Absolutely absurd. How on earth do you do that?
Yeah. So I think that like for motivation and stuff, this is an add-on that you can get for Anki. It's called the Heatmap add-on. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but basically it'll kind of give you a little colored block for every day. So I can go back, even look at this one. This is all of last year. So the last time I missed a day on Anki was basically spring break last year. Unfortunately, I missed those 2 days. Otherwise I could have a longer streak. But yeah, so basically what the streak means is that I've logged into Anki and done, you know, some sort of flashcard review for over a year now at this point. It ebbs and flows, so it has my daily average of 319. As I was preparing for step 1, you know, that number went up, obviously. And then after I took the exam, you know, I went on a little bit of a vacation and stuff. That number went down, but nonetheless, every day I logged in and did some amount of flashcards. So someday I would do 700, someday I would do 70. But I think the key with Anki and with spaced repetition is that you have to be consistent. Like I just think medical school, you know, it's a lot of information, and it's, in my opinion, it's not necessarily about who puts in the most hours, who cuts in out of their sleep. It's about who's like consistent day after day after day. And so that's kind of why the streak is something that I think is like very motivational for me and helpful for a lot of people.
So that was the Heatmap add-on. Hope you found that segment of the video useful. Highly recommend you install it because it does really help with motivation and consistency. The next add-on we're going to talk about is the Anki Frozen Fields add-on, which makes it actually a lot more efficient to add cards, especially if you're in, for example, a lecture, or if you're going through your lecture notes or a textbook. The frozen field add-on is absolutely amazing, and here is Prereq explaining why it's useful and how to use it appropriately.
The other add-on I really like, and this is really clutch too, it's called the frozen fields add-on. It's these snowflakes next to the thing. And what that really helps you do is, let me just change this deck to something useless. It's like, let's say I'm making a topic like blah, 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 and then the answer is like something here. And then I press add. It will actually preserve everything I wrote, especially when I'm trying to create multiple questions from one concept. Preserving what I wrote here helps, because then I can change one or two things and then change the answer, and I don't have to rewrite the whole question. Especially really useful also for this extra column, because we talked about the fact that in the extra column, I put all the prerequisite info I need to answer multiple questions. So let's say in the extra column, I include everything about respiratory acidosis. Then I keep that frozen. I want to have that there. And then I just unfreeze this part and create as many questions as I want about respiratory acidosis. And now I have the frozen field add-on holding that source of knowledge constant. And then I can just keep switching out the cards that I make from that.
That is ridiculously useful.
That's so useful, especially when you're someone like me who makes a lot of flashcards. You want to minimize the time you spend on flashcards while making them the most useful possible. So the fact that I can put whatever I want here and save it, and then, you know, keep changing the top is really helpful, especially when you're going from a big thing to making multiple little flashcard questions.
The next add-on is actually something that I didn't know existed until Sanjesh, who was one of the people that we interviewed for this class, explained it to me. And this makes it easier to look stuff up, which again, it just kind of shaves seconds off every interaction that we have with Anki and is therefore incredibly useful. So I'm going to hand you over to Sanjesh explaining the Wikipedia, what's it called? The pop-up Wikipedia beta. At least that's what it's called at the time of recording. Maybe they're out of beta now, but yeah, pop-up Wikipedia. Here is Sanjesh, here we go.
I got this Wikipedia search add-on. So if I'm looking at a card, so I can highlight a word on Anki and I can press Command-Shift-W, I think. Nope. Yeah, I can press Command-Shift-W on Mark, and it will come up with a Wikipedia preview of the thing.
Oh, incredible. What's this called? This is so useful.
Yeah, so this is pop-up Wikipedia beta.
Nice. Okay, that's handy. I didn't know that existed, but that's really helpful.
Medical school Anki Reddit. Yeah, so this is quite useful. So if I forget something completely, if I don't know what it is, I've just got like an immediate, Wikipedia is really good for learning anyway. I use that if I don't listen to a lecture, and I've just got that pop up immediately instead of Googling it.
So that was the pop-up Wikipedia beta add-on. Hope you found that useful. I definitely learned something from that, did not know it existed. And I kind of wish I knew it existed before, because it would have saved me having to Google stuff on Alfred on my Mac or on my iPhone on Safari, like every time I didn't understand something. All right, so next we have the speed focus mode add-on. And this is something that I knew existed that I don't personally use myself, because I don't have personally the huge volume of flashcards that people like Prereq do when preparing for the USMLE. So I'm going to hand you over to Prereq explaining what is speed focus mode and why it's helpful. So here we go.
Oh, this one comes in clutch. Which one is it? Speed focus mode? Have you used this one?
No, I haven't. What is that?
So speed focus mode is how I got through. When I was doing Anki for step 1, I was doing 2,000 flashcards in 3 hours. So it's like an incredibly crazy fast pace. And the reason I was able to do that is this add-on flashcard, which basically you tell it how automatically after like 5 seconds, it plays an alert. And then after 7 seconds, it will automatically show me the answer. And so the good part about this is it really, I'll show you why I like it. It like when it plays that alert, it really makes you realize like, dude, you've been staring at this for 5 seconds. Do you know that? And then by 7 seconds, it will automatically show you the answer. So here, let's just practice and I'll show you what I mean. So 4 signs and symptoms. So I think after 5 seconds, it plays this alarm and then it just shows me the answer right away. And the reason this is good is 1, it limits the time. And 2, if you're already dealing with a lot of cards that you know, this like increases your pace much more so than you would ever think. And so again, 3 facets of lifestyle modification, like weight gain, weight loss, exercise, diet. And so by 5 seconds it plays it, and then by 7 seconds it shows the answer. But the good part is it forces you to be like, dude, I'm doing Anki right now. I'm going to zone in and just focus. As opposed to, I don't know about you, but when I'm doing Anki without this add-on, I'm like half on Instagram. I get a couple questions right. I'm feeling good. Yeah. And the other part is when that beeper goes off at 5 seconds, it is a physical reminder to you that you have been staring at this blank sheet of paper for 5 seconds. So if you don't know it now, you probably just don't know it well enough. So learn it and then move on. I usually use 5 and 8, so not 5 seconds. So it'll play the alarm at 5 seconds, and then it will show the answer. And there is also the option that you can automatically mark it to say again, but I don't usually do that. I just make them show me my answer, and then I'll say, do I really know this? Do I not? And then I'll press what I need to press. So this saved me a lot of time, primarily when I was scrunched for time. I was able to do a lot more cards. I was able to get through them relatively fast, keep my speed up. But I don't use that add-on now, because right now time is not a constraining issue. I find that this add-on really just helps when it's like crunch time, go time. So those are like my top 3 add-ons, I'd say.
So that was an overview of the speed focus mode add-on. Like I said, I don't personally use this myself because I've got enough discipline to just kind of go through it. And at least for our UK medical school exams, we didn't have such a huge volume of information like the US guys do for the USMLE. So if you're taking the USMLE or another exam that has such a massive amount of content, then maybe this is an add-on worth considering. All right, if you got to the end of this class without skipping all of it, then incredibly well played, firstly. And secondly, thank you for juicing my watch time stats, and hopefully we'll make some money from the YouTube AdSense on this class, but probably not very much because you're probably a student and YouTube doesn't monetize students very effectively. Anyway, if you want to learn more about studying, you might want to check out this 3-hour-long masterclass over here, which is also one of my free online courses where I break down the science of effective studying and how you can use it to your advantage. Thanks for watching. See you next time.